6 weeks after my wedding, my sister slid my parents' homeowner's insurance renewal across a cafe table and told me I needed to fix what I had done. Lauren's fingers stayed pressed against the envelope as if she were delivering evidence at a trial. "Mom and Dad are having to use their own money every month because of you," she said. I had been prepared for another lecture about family, loyalty, or how marriage had supposedly changed me. I was not prepared for those 3 words. Their own money. For more than a year, I had been sending my parents $4,200 every month because my father had insisted they were caught in a temporary cash flow problem after his retirement. Now my sister was talking as if there had been plenty of money sitting somewhere all along. I looked at her and asked, "How much are they having to use?" Lauren pulled her hand away from the envelope. "That's not the point." I leaned back. It just became the point. If you've ever been the person your family depends on because you're supposedly the one who can always handle everything, stay with me, because what I discovered after that conversation changed the way I understood my parents, my sister, and every dollar I had ever sent them. And if stories like this hit close to home, subscribe to the channel and stay until the end, because the wedding toast was only where this started becoming visible. Lauren stared into her coffee. She had always been terrible at silence. As children, she filled every quiet room with questions, complaints, gossip, anything that kept attention moving toward her. At 32, she still did it, except now she disguised it as concern. "They're retired, Megan. They shouldn't have to tear through what they saved because you got your feelings hurt. I asked you how much. I don't know exactly, but you know they're using their own money." She exhaled hard. "Retirement money? Investments? Whatever. You know what I meant." Actually, I didn't. That was the problem. My father had spent 14 months describing those investments as something he couldn't reasonably touch yet. Not something he preferred not to touch. Not something he was protecting for later. Something he presented as temporarily inaccessible without creating unnecessary losses and tax problems. I had accepted that explanation because numbers were the one language my father and I had always shared. Or so I had thought. I folded the insurance notice once and pushed it back toward Lauren. "Then Dad can explain it." Her mouth tightened. "You really don't care what happens to them anymore." That was the accusation she had come to deliver. The bill was just a prop. I looked at the woman sitting across from me and tried to decide whether she actually believed what she was saying. "You want to know what I care about? I care about why 2 people who supposedly needed more than $50,000 a year from me suddenly have money they're upset about spending." Lauren grabbed the envelope. "Talk to Dad." Then she stood and left. To understand why those words stopped me cold, I have to go back 10 days before my wedding. On August 13th, I was at my office reviewing a cost forecast for a hospital expansion when my father called. One of our subcontractors had submitted a revised projection that looked reasonable until I noticed the schedule depended on material arriving almost 3 weeks earlier than the supplier had promised. The total wasn't the problem. The assumption underneath it was. I remember telling one of my coordinators, "Never stare at the number so long that you forget to ask what has to be true for that number to work." My phone rang before she could answer. "Dad." I almost let it go to voicemail because I was working and because 10 days before my wedding, every conversation with my family seemed to generate another task. But I answered. He skipped hello. "You're leaving the monthly transfer alone after you get married, right?" I turned away from my monitor. "What?" "The transfer. Your mother wanted to know if Ethan's going to start interfering with it." There was so much wrong with that sentence that I had to choose which part to address first. "Ethan has never interfered with it. You know what I mean." "No, Dad, I don't." He made the impatient sound he used whenever he thought somebody was forcing him to explain something obvious. Once people get married, they start combining finances. "I just want to know we're not going to suddenly have a problem." The arrangement already ended. Silence. I reminded him of what we had agreed to. When he sold his HVAC supply company the previous year, the deal had included a seller note, so part of the purchase price would be paid over time. He told me he didn't want to sell investments during that transition, especially in the same year as the business sale. He had called the gap temporary. I had asked how much. He had given me a number. I offered $4,200 a month for 6 months, then we would review it. 6 months later, he showed me a cash flow summary and asked for another 6. I agreed. By June, the second period had ended. I should have stopped then. Instead, I was coordinating vendors, guest lists, deadlines, work, and a wedding that had somehow become everybody else's project. I told myself I would leave the transfer alone through August and have the conversation after the honeymoon. That delay was mine. I own it. I wasn't afraid of my parents. I was tired. And by then, money had become the fastest way to buy silence. On the phone, Dad said, "You never told us you were going to pull the rug out from under us. I told you 6 months, then another 6. I added 2 more because of the wedding. You're talking about your parents like we're some vendor contract. No, I'm talking about an agreement we made." He lowered his voice, which with my father was usually more threatening than when he raised it. "Your sister would never make us justify ourselves like strangers." That comparison had been used so many times that most of my life I barely reacted to it. Lauren stayed closer. Lauren called more often. Lauren brought the kids over on Sundays. Lauren needed help. And somehow needing help had always been treated as proof that she understood family better than I did. That afternoon, something in me was simply too tired to perform the usual response. "Then ask Lauren." Dad said nothing. I could hear the faint hum of his car through the phone. Finally, he said, "We'll talk after the wedding." "No, we'll talk after the honeymoon." I ended the call and went back to my forecast. 10 days later, I married Ethan. The reception was held indoors at a hotel in Charlotte because late August in North Carolina can make formal clothing feel like punishment. By the time dinner ended, I had finally stopped thinking about seating charts and vendors. I was married. The hard parts were over. At least, that was what I believed. One of my senior colleagues came over, while Dad was standing near our table. He shook my father's hand and said, "You must be incredibly proud of Megan. She manages projects bigger than most companies." Dad smiled. It was technically a smile, but I had known his face for 37 years. His jaw set slightly whenever praise made him uncomfortable. A little later, Ethan's father put a hand on Dad's shoulder and said, "We're lucky she's joining our family." Dad thanked him. Again, perfectly polite. At the time, I thought nothing of either exchange. Looking back, they mattered. When my father stood for his toast, I expected a few embarrassing childhood stories. Maybe something about how stubborn I had always been. Maybe one of his jokes about me organizing my toys by size when I was 5. He started warmly enough. "Megan has always been independent." People smiled. She always knew where she was going. School, career, work. She never needed much help from anybody. I glanced at Ethan. He squeezed my hand. Then Dad said, "But as I've gotten older, I've learned that success isn't just titles or paychecks." Something in his tone changed. He turned away from me, toward Lauren. My sister was sitting 2 tables over with her husband and children. Dad lifted his glass. "Lauren is our success story." Lauren's expression flickered. Even she had not expected that. Dad continued. "She stayed close. She gave us a family. She understands what really matters." A few people started clapping. Then my father smiled. "The only one we're proud of." The applause got louder because most of those people had no idea what they had just applauded. I did. I looked at my mother. She was seated 3 chairs away from him, holding her wine glass with both hands. "Mom." She looked at me. "Do you agree?" That was all I asked. I gave her a door wide enough to walk through. She could have laughed awkwardly and said Dad had gone too far. She could have said she was proud of both of us. She could have changed the subject, softened the sentence, done almost anything. Instead, she smiled. Completely. Something inside me became very quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't grab the microphone. I didn't ruin my own wedding to give my parents the confrontation they apparently expected. I looked at Ethan and said, "Can we finish our dinner?" He studied my face for a second, then nodded. Dad sat down. Lauren avoided looking at me. The reception continued. I danced with my husband. I thanked guests, I hugged friends, I cut cake. When my parents left, I wished them good night. For years, my family had interpreted my self-control as surrender. That night, they made the same mistake one last time. After we reached the hotel suite, I took off my shoes and sat at the small desk near the window. Ethan loosened his tie and watched me open my laptop. "What are you doing?" "Checking something." I searched my email until I found the original message from June of the previous year. Dad had written that the arrangement would be temporary. 6 months. Review after that. I found the December extension. Another 6 months. Then I checked my bank. 14 months of transfers. $4,200 each. The next one had not processed yet. Ethan sat across from me. "Are you canceling it because of what he said?" I looked at the screen. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." He waited. I appreciated that about him. Ethan rarely filled silence just because silence existed. Finally he asked, "Is this a boundary? Or are you trying to hurt them?" It was the right question. If I was canceling the transfer only to make Dad suffer because he humiliated me, then I would be using money exactly the way my family did as leverage. So I looked again at the agreement, at the dates, at the extensions, at my own mistake in letting something temporary continue because I didn't want an argument before my wedding. Then I understood what actually bothered me. "They haven't asked me for this money in months," I said. Ethan frowned. "They just expect it." I opened the recurring transfer. "They don't even have to tell me what they need anymore. It just leaves my account. So what are you going to do? If they have a real emergency, they can send me the bill. They can tell me what happened. I can decide whether I want to help. And the automatic payment?" I clicked cancel. Automatic access is over. Then I texted both of my parents. I told them the monthly support arrangement had ended. If they faced a genuine emergency, they could send me the bill and explain the situation, and I would consider helping case by case. I did not mention the toast. I did not mention Lauren. I did not threaten anyone. Dad didn't respond. Mom sent one sentence. "We'll discuss this when you've calmed down." I put my phone face down. 4 days later, Mom sent me a homeowner's insurance renewal notice. No explanation. No request. Just a photograph of the page and a message beneath it. "This needs to be handled Friday." I stared at it for maybe 15 seconds. Then I forwarded the message and the notice to Lauren. She called me almost immediately. "What is this?" "Mom's insurance renewal." "I can see that. Why did you send it to me?" I leaned back in my chair. "Dad told a ballroom full of people that you're the one who understands family. I figured he'd rather ask you." "This is so petty." "No, petty would be sending it to every guest who applauded." "Megan, I'm working, Lauren. You're seriously going to make Mom and Dad beg you every time something comes up?" "No, I'm going to make them ask. There's no difference." "There is to me." I ended the call. At that point, I believed the worst thing I had discovered was entitlement. I thought my parents had simply gotten comfortable with money that was supposed to be temporary. I thought Dad's wedding toast had finally pushed me to correct a boundary I should have enforced 2 months earlier. I still believed the financial problem itself was real. 6 weeks later, Lauren sat across from me in that cafe and told me my parents were now being forced to use their own money. That was when the story changed. Because if my parents had enough money for everyone to panic when they started spending it, I needed to know why mine had been the first money they were allowed to touch. 14 months before my wedding, my father called me on a Tuesday evening and told me retirement had turned out to be more complicated than he expected. At that point, Dad had just finished selling the HVAC supply company he had spent most of my childhood building. He had never been a man who liked admitting uncertainty. So when he said there was a temporary cash flow problem, I listened. The sale had not been one giant check deposited into his account. Part of the price had been paid up front, but a large portion was structured as a seller note that would pay out over time. Dad explained that he and Mom had money invested, but he did not want to start selling assets during the same year as the business sale if he could avoid it. He talked about taxes, timing, and preserving flexibility until the new income streams settled into place. None of that sounded absurd to me. What would have sounded absurd was writing him a blank check. So I asked questions. "What is the actual monthly gap?" I said. Dad gave me a number, a little under $4,000. I asked when the seller note payments would become reliable. He said early the following year. I asked how long he thought he needed help. He said a few months, maybe 6. I remember sitting at my kitchen island with a yellow legal pad in front of me, writing down numbers while he talked. Dad finally laughed and said, "You know you're allowed to have a conversation without turning it into a project plan." I told him, "If you're asking me for thousands of dollars, it is a project plan." He didn't like the answer, but he accepted it. I offered $4,200 a month for 6 months. I picked that amount because it covered the gap he described and gave them a little cushion without forcing me to rearrange my entire financial life. At the time, I was earning just under $200,000 a year between salary and a normal performance bonus. I had no student loans left, no children, and a mortgage I could comfortably carry. $4,200 a month was not nothing. It meant less money into my brokerage account, fewer trips, and postponing some renovations I wanted to do. But I was not emptying my retirement account, borrowing on credit cards, or skipping my own bills. I could help. More importantly, I thought I understood exactly what I was agreeing to. Dad did too. I sent him an email after our call because I knew how family conversations had a way of changing shape later. I wrote that I would send $4,200 monthly for 6 months, then we would review the situation based on his new retirement income. Dad replied, "That works." Mom replied separately and called it a bridge, nothing more. I saved both emails, not because I expected to use them as evidence against my parents someday, but because documentation was simply how my brain worked. At my job, memory did not settle disputes. Dates did. Numbers did. Agreements did. For those first 6 months, nothing dramatic happened. The transfer left my account automatically. Mom occasionally thanked me. Dad rarely mentioned it. That should have bothered me more than it did. In the beginning, every payment had a reason attached to it. By the 3rd or 4th month, the money had become background noise. I had a demanding job, a house, friends, a relationship that was becoming serious, and no desire to spend my evenings auditing my parents' checking account. I knew Dad had assets. He had never claimed he was destitute. His argument had always been that the timing of those assets made spending them inefficient. There was a difference. And at the time, I believed the difference mattered. In December, when the 6 months were up, I reminded him it was time to review. To his credit, he did not immediately ask me to keep paying. He sent me a cash flow summary. It showed seller note income beginning to come in, retirement income starting to settle, and expenses that were still higher than the cash he wanted to use each month. The gap was smaller than before, but it had not disappeared. I called him and asked why. He walked me through the numbers. Some of it was reasonable. Some payments from the sale were irregular. Insurance costs had changed. He said he wanted more time before deciding how much income to draw from investments. I remember staring at one column and saying, "What assumption are you using for investment withdrawals?" Dad sighed. "Not everything in life is one of your project spreadsheets, Megan. That isn't an answer. It means I'm not going to liquidate long-term assets every time a monthly expense moves around." I told him I was not suggesting that. I was asking what his plan was when my help ended. He said, "Give me another 6 months. By summer, everything should be settled." That sounded definite enough, so I agreed. Looking back, that second agreement mattered because it proved I was not blindly handing money over. I asked. I reviewed. I challenged him. What I failed to understand was that Dad and I were operating under 2 different definitions of a boundary. I thought an agreed limit was a limit until both people changed it. Dad seemed to believe a limit remained temporary as long as he still had a reason to dislike it. By the following spring, my wedding planning had swallowed every spare hour I had. Ethan and I were not having some extravagant celebrity wedding. But even a normal wedding becomes a second job when relatives start treating every decision like a referendum on family loyalty. My mother had opinions about flowers. Lauren had opinions about seating. Dad complained that Ethan and I were making things too formal. then complained when we removed two traditions he insisted were important. I was coordinating contractors at work during the day and answering messages about centerpieces at night. I knew the second 6-month period was ending in June. I also knew if I brought it up then, Dad would turn it into a fight. That was where I made my mistake. I told myself 2 more months would not matter. I was not scared to confront my parents. I had confronted subcontractors who were trying to bury 6-figure mistakes inside change orders. I had told executives their schedules were impossible. I had walked into meetings where everyone in the room outranked me and still said no when the numbers did not work. My problem with my family was different. I had learned that a disagreement with Dad never stayed inside the subject that started it. A question about money became a question about gratitude. A boundary became disrespect. A disagreement became evidence that I had always cared more about work than family. So when June arrived, I looked at the calendar, saw the wedding less than 2 months away, and decided I would keep paying through August. I did not tell myself I was sacrificing for my parents. I told myself I was buying quiet. That distinction made me feel smarter than I was. The transfer continued through June and July. I did not have to think about it. $4,200 disappeared from my checking account on schedule. And in exchange, no one called me to argue about retirement withdrawals while I was juggling wedding deadlines. It was efficient. That was how I justified it. Then, 10 days before the wedding, Dad called and asked whether the payments would continue after I got married. That conversation mattered because he was not asking whether I could help if something went wrong. He was asking whether the money itself had become permanent. When I told him we would review it after the honeymoon, he reacted as if I had changed a promise. I reminded him that the original arrangement had lasted 6 months, and the extension had lasted another 6. He acted as if the fact that I had voluntarily added 2 more months erased the existence of every previous limit. "You never told us August was some hard stop," he said. "I told you June was. That's exactly what I mean. You keep talking about dates and rules like this is business. It becomes business when you're asking me to budget $50,000 a year around it." There was a pause. Then he said, "You can afford it." I remember that sentence more clearly than almost anything else from that call. Not, "We still need it." Not, "Here's what changed." Not even, "Please give us more time. You can afford it." It was the first moment I should have understood that the subject had shifted. Dad was no longer explaining why they needed help. He was explaining why I had no good reason to stop helping. I said, "Whether I can afford something and whether I agreed to it are different questions." He did not answer that either. Instead, he brought Lauren into it. "Your sister would never do this. Lauren understands family. Lauren does not make us prove ourselves." I told him to ask Lauren. 10 days later, he toasted her at my wedding. After I canceled the transfer that night, Dad did not call for almost 2 days. Mom did. Her first message was not a question about whether I was okay after what had happened at the reception. It was not an apology. It was not even anger about the money. It said, "Your father is extremely hurt." I wrote back, "So am I." She replied, "You know he didn't mean it the way you're taking it." I stared at that sentence for a long time. I had never understood why people said things like that. Dad had stood in front of a ballroom, pointed at my sister, and called her the only daughter they were proud of. There were not many alternate interpretations available. I wrote, "I asked you if you agreed." Mom called immediately. "Megan, this is exactly what I was afraid of. You're making one stupid moment into something much bigger." I didn't make it bigger. I ended an arrangement that had already expired. Those are completely separate things. Then why are you calling about both of them in the same conversation? She changed direction. "Your father is under a lot of stress. So am I. You have Ethan now." That sentence landed differently than she intended. "What does that mean?" "You're not alone. You have 2 incomes. You have your career. You have your house. Your father and I are retired. You also have assets. We have savings we worked our whole lives for. And I have savings I worked for. Megan, don't do this." "Do what?" "Turn everything into equal dollars. Families don't work that way." I almost laughed. but there was nothing funny about it. I'm not asking you to give me anything. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Mom went quiet. Finally, she said, some people in a family have more capacity. There it was again. Capacity. A softer word for obligation. I told her the offer still stood. If they had a genuine emergency, they could send me the bill and explain what happened. I would decide case by case. Mom sounded offended by the very structure of that sentence. We have to ask our own daughter for permission now? For my money? Yes. She ended the call soon after that. A few days later came the homeowner's insurance renewal notice, followed by Lauren's angry phone call. After that, the silence lasted less than a week. Then my Aunt Marianne called. She was my mother's younger sister, and I liked her, which made the conversation worse. She did not accuse me outright. She approached carefully. Your mom says things have been difficult since the wedding. I'm sure she does. She says you stopped helping them financially. I ended a temporary arrangement. There was a pause. She said Ethan wasn't comfortable with you supporting them anymore. That was new. Ethan had nothing to do with it. Oh. I could hear Marianne recalibrating. What exactly did she tell you? She just said you two got married and suddenly your priorities changed. I almost defended myself. I could feel the old instinct rise immediately. Explain the dates. Explain the agreement. Explain the extra 2 months. Make sure everyone understood I was not cruel. Then I stopped. I had spent most of my life trying to correct whatever version of me my parents had described to other people. Too ambitious, too distant, too practical, too busy, too independent. Every defense became another performance. So I said, Mom and Dad have income and assets. I helped them temporarily during Dad's transition into retirement. That arrangement ended. Marianne waited for more. I did not give it to her. Finally, she said, I didn't realize it was temporary. I know. We changed the subject. That evening, Ethan found me standing at the kitchen counter with my phone in my hand. I told him what Marianne had said. He asked, Are you going to call your mom? No. Your dad? No. Everyone else they talked to? I looked at him. He smiled slightly. Good. I put the phone down. I'm not going to spend my honeymoon period doing public relations for my own family. That seems healthy. I'm serious. So am I. He opened the refrigerator, then looked back at me. Can I ask you something you probably won't like? Apparently that's your favorite hobby now. If your dad had stood up at the wedding and said you were the greatest daughter in the history of daughters, would you still have kept paying them? I started to answer immediately. Then I stopped, because the honest answer embarrassed me. Probably. Ethan nodded. That doesn't mean the toast didn't matter. I didn't say it didn't. It was horrible. I know. I folded my arms. Then what's your point? My point is that the toast didn't create the problem. He closed the refrigerator. It showed you what the money meant to them. I did not answer. He came over and rested his hands on the counter opposite me. They were willing to publicly tell you that Lauren was the only daughter they were proud of while assuming your money would keep arriving every month. Those two things existed comfortably in their heads at the same time. That was the part I had not been able to articulate. They didn't think the money had anything to do with how they treated me. Exactly. I looked away. Ethan said, And maybe you didn't either. That one hurt because it was true. I had separated everything into boxes because boxes were easier to manage. My parents' favoritism went in one box. My career went in another. The money went in another. My irritation went somewhere I rarely opened. As long as every problem had its own label, I could tell myself none of them added up to anything larger. A week later, I drove to my parents' house to pick up a garment bag Mom had taken home from the wedding. Their house looked exactly the same. That fact should not have mattered, but it did. Dad's SUV was in the driveway. The landscaping service had been there that morning. Inside, Mom was talking about whether they would still take a trip they had discussed for the following spring. Dad mentioned renewing part of his country club membership, then complained that everything had become ridiculously expensive. They were not living like people facing immediate financial collapse. They were living like people who had suddenly been asked to spend money they preferred not to spend. That was different. I did not confront them there. I picked up the garment bag and left. By then, Dad's story had started traveling through the family. I had become the daughter who married a man and immediately cut off her elderly parents. Ethan had become the controlling husband, even though he had never once told me what to do with my money. Lauren had become the daughter who remained loyal. For a while, I let them tell it. Then, in early October, Lauren sat across from me in that cafe and made the mistake of saying my parents were now having to use their own money. After she left, I drove back to my office with that phrase repeating in my head. Their own money. I had never believed my parents had nothing. Dad had always been clear that they had investments. What I had believed was that accessing those assets during his transition would create enough financial disadvantage that my temporary help made sense. That was no longer the same question. Now I wanted to know why spending their own money had become a crisis. I did not have to wait long. The next morning, an email from Dad appeared in my inbox. The subject line said, "Since you want numbers, here they are." There was no greeting, no message beyond one sentence. "Maybe this will help you understand what you're forcing us to do." Attached was a PDF a little over 20 pages long. I opened it before my first meeting. The first page was a summary of income, expenses, investments, and home equity. I read the total invested assets twice, then a third time. Dad had spent more than a year talking about their finances as if every dollar I sent was protecting them from a dangerous gap. The number on that page told a very different story. My parents were not broke. They were not even close. I sat at my desk with Dad's financial packet open on one screen and my morning meeting calendar blinking on the other. For several seconds, I did nothing except stare at the number listed under invested assets. $1.9 million. Not home equity, not the remaining value of his business sale. Invested assets. I scrolled back to the top to make sure I had not misread a subtotal. Then I checked the categories underneath it. Retirement accounts. Taxable investments. Cash equivalents. The numbers were rounded, but not so rounded that I could mistake what they meant. My parents had close to $2 million invested, a house that was nearly paid off, income coming from Dad's seller note, and Social Security and retirement income layered on top of that. They were not living paycheck to paycheck. They were not choosing between groceries and medication. They were not one missed transfer from me, away from losing their house. I closed my office door. Then I canceled my first meeting. The packet was 23 pages long, most of it the kind of material people skim because the totals look more important than the details. Dad knew I would not skim. That was one of the stranger parts. He had sent the packet because he believed the numbers would prove his point. In his mind, the problem was not whether he and Mom had assets. The problem was that without my $4,200 each month, they would have to use those assets in ways he considered unacceptable. I opened a notebook. At work, when a project looked wrong, I did not start by accusing anyone of lying. I started by identifying what I knew. My parents had money. Their recurring cash income did not fully cover the lifestyle they wanted to maintain. Their investment portfolio could cover the gap. Dad did not want to draw enough from the portfolio to cover that gap. That was different from what I had believed for the previous 14 months. Not necessarily fraudulent, not necessarily sinister, but different. I wrote one question across the top of the page. Why? The first answer was obvious enough that I almost stopped there. Lifestyle. The packet listed property taxes, homeowners insurance, utilities, vehicle expenses, dining, travel, club dues, charitable giving, household maintenance, and an amount labeled miscellaneous that was larger than some people's rent. None of those expenses alone were outrageous for a couple who had owned a successful business. Taken together, they were expensive. I leaned back and thought about the house. 4 bedrooms for 2 people. A formal dining room used maybe 6 times a year. Landscaping they no longer did themselves. A neighborhood where annual dues and property taxes had climbed steadily. Dad's SUV. Mom's habit of booking nice hotels because she said retirement was supposed to be enjoyed. The easiest explanation was that my parents had built a retirement lifestyle that cost more than their recurring income and had decided I should cover the difference so they would not have to adjust. That explanation made me angry enough. It also made sense. For about 20 minutes, I thought I had found the whole answer. Then Ethan called. He was between site visits and asked whether I had eaten breakfast. I told him Dad had sent me his finances. There was a pause. Voluntarily? Apparently he thinks they prove I'm destroying his retirement. What do they prove? They have almost $2 million invested. Another pause. Well, exactly. I told him about the expenses, the house, the club, the travel projections. I think this may be simpler than I thought. They don't want to change their lifestyle. That would explain why they're unhappy. It would explain all of it. Would it? I knew that tone. What? Would lifestyle explain the exact $4,200? I looked at the packet again. What do you mean? You said your dad originally gave you a monthly shortfall and you picked a number around it. Yes. And that same amount kept going out for 14 months. Yes. If this was just lifestyle creep, why would the same exact number still be the number they expected after their seller note payments started? I stared at the page. Ethan said, "You're the spreadsheet person, remember? I hate when you're useful." I know. I hung up and went back to the PDF. This time I stopped reading it like a daughter. I read it like a project manager. The summary pages gave me the totals. I wanted the assumptions. Near the middle of the file, I found a page labeled Projected Household Cash Flow. That led to another section with annual estimates. I followed the references to a spreadsheet export embedded in the PDF. At the top of the first page was a title, 10-year family projection. I read it once. Then I sat back. 10 years. I had agreed to 6 months. Then 6 more. I had voluntarily added 2. Somewhere between my temporary help and Dad's retirement planning, my $4,200 had been given a 10-year life expectancy. I moved down the rows. Seller note income, Social Security, investment income, required withdrawals, household expenses, travel, insurance, property taxes, gifts, family support. I stopped. The row read, family support $4,200 monthly. The amount repeated across the entire planning horizon, year 1, year 2, year 3, all the way through year 10. There was no end date. No footnote saying temporary. No note that Megan would review annually. No alternative scenario showing the payment ending. My money was not listed as help. It was listed as income. I remember feeling something colder than anger. Anger would have been easier. Anger is simple. Someone hurts you, you get mad. This felt more like finding your name printed on a contract you never signed. I opened the original email from June of the previous year and placed it beside the projection. 6 months. Review. I opened Dad's December email. Another 6 months. Then I looked back at the 10-year model. At work, I had seen bad projections built around optimistic assumptions before. A contractor assumes labor productivity will improve. A client assumes materials will arrive early. Someone assumes an approval will happen on schedule because the alternative makes the budget ugly. The math can be perfect. The assumption can still be fiction. Dad's model worked beautifully if I kept paying. That was the problem. I copied 2 columns into a blank spreadsheet of my own. I did not recreate every detail. I did not need to. I only wanted to see what changed if I removed myself. With my payment included, my parents could keep investment withdrawals lower and maintain most of their existing spending. Without it, the model did not collapse. The house did not disappear. Their food budget did not turn negative. Their retirement income did not vanish. They simply had to pull more from their own assets, roughly $50,000 a year more, depending on the assumptions. That was almost exactly what I had been supplying. I stared at the result. I had not been keeping my parents alive. I had been keeping their portfolio fuller. There is a difference so obvious that I was embarrassed I had not asked the right question earlier. But then I reminded myself that I had asked questions. I had asked about timing. I had asked about income. I had asked how long they needed help. What I had not asked was what they were protecting. That question had never occurred to me because I believed the thing being protected was their retirement security. I called Dad. He answered on the third ring. I assume you read it. I did. Good. Then maybe now you understand why this little protest of yours has consequences. I looked at the 10-year projection on my screen. Why is my payment in a 10-year model? Silence. Then he said, because it's a planning model. That isn't what I asked. Megan, projections use assumptions. I know. He sounded irritated by that. I said, why is a temporary arrangement in your assumptions for 10 years? You are fixating on one line. It's $4,200 a month for 10 years. That's over $500,000. I think I'm allowed to fixate. You are not paying us $500,000. Your spreadsheet assumes I will. It assumes family support remains consistent. I almost laughed. Family support. Yes. You mean me. You have always been in a stronger financial position. That does not answer why you projected my money for 10 years without asking me. Dad exhaled sharply. Because we thought we could count on you. You could count on what I agreed to. You're splitting hairs. No. I'm reading your spreadsheet. You're reading it like an auditor looking for a crime. There doesn't have to be a crime for something to be wrong. He went quiet. I continued. If the plan only works because I keep paying, why didn't you show me this plan when you asked for the extension? You didn't need all of this. I apparently needed enough of it to fund it. That's ridiculous. What exactly happens if my payment stops? You saw the numbers. I did. Your investments go down faster. That is not some minor thing. I didn't say it was. We spent our whole lives building those assets. And you expect me to spend mine so you don't have to use yours? That is not what this is. Then tell me what it is. Dad's voice hardened. It is family helping family. Why does family helping family only show up as money leaving my account? That's insulting. Then answer the question. He did not. Instead, he said, you are acting as if your mother and I are sitting on piles of cash while begging you to buy groceries. I never said that. That is exactly what you're implying. No. I'm saying you gave me one reason for needing help, and your own numbers show something different. The reason was temporary liquidity. For 14 months, we were transitioning. Your transition became a 10-year assumption. Another silence. Dad finally said, you have no idea what it takes to build something over 30 years and then watch it get chipped away because your own daughter decides she suddenly needs to make a point. That sentence told me more than anything else he had said. Chipped away. Yes. You mean spent. I mean preserved responsibly. For what? He did not answer. I repeated it. For what, Dad? He said. You're being deliberately obtuse. No, I'm asking the assumption underneath the number. He hung up. I sat there with the phone still against my ear. The irony would have been funny if it had not been my life. Dad had spent years teasing me for treating everything like a project. The first time I applied the same discipline to him, he could not tolerate the questions. I did not call back. Instead, I returned to the packet. If lifestyle had been the whole explanation, Dad could have said so. We like the house. We want to keep traveling. We do not want to reduce our standard of living. I would not have liked that answer, but at least it would have been honest. His reaction told me there was another layer, so I kept reading. The model contained scenario notes. Some were straightforward. Estimated inflation, healthcare costs, seller note timing, projected vehicle replacement, home maintenance. Then I noticed how often the model referred to maintaining principal. Preserve principal, maintain capital base. Avoid excessive drawdown. I highlighted every occurrence. Dad was not trying to avoid running out of money. He was trying to prevent the portfolio from dropping below a number he had decided mattered. That evening, Mom called. Her voice was softer than Dad's. Megan, your father says you two had a terrible conversation. We had a very clear conversation. He is upset. So am I. You keep saying that, because nobody seems to hear it. Mom sighed. You know your father. He plans too much. That is not the problem. He's conservative about money. He always has been. I know. He spent his whole life making sure we would be secure. I know. So when he sees those accounts dropping faster than planned, it scares him. I paused. That was the closest anyone had come to saying something honest. Mom, do you hear what you just said? What? You're scared the accounts will drop. Of course. Not that you can't pay the bills. That's part of the same thing. No, it isn't. It is when you're retired. Not at the level you're describing. Her tone sharpened. You don't get to decide what level is acceptable for us. I almost answered defensively, then stopped. She was right about one thing. I did not get to decide what level was acceptable for them. But they did not get to make me fund the level they preferred. I'm not deciding how much you should keep, I said. I'm deciding how much of my money goes toward keeping it. Mom was quiet. I continued. Why is Dad so determined not to let the investments go down? Because we worked for that money. I worked for mine. Megan, I'm asking a real question. So am I. What are you trying not to spend it on? We are not trying not to spend it. Then why is spending it being treated like something I caused? She hesitated. I heard a television somewhere behind her. Finally, she said, we just don't want to burn through everything we built. There it was. Not lose. Not need. Burn through. I looked at the packet again. Everything for what? For our future. You're 64 and 67. This is your future. That is not what I mean. Then what do you mean? She did not answer. Mom, there are other things to think about. Like what? The family. I sat straighter. What family? All of us. That doesn't mean anything. It means exactly what it means. No, it doesn't. Dad has a 10-year projection that assumes my money keeps coming in while your investments barely move. If that money is being preserved for something, I want to know what. You are turning this into an interrogation. I sent you nearly $60,000. That was your choice. The words hit me so fast I almost missed their importance. Yes, I said. It was. Mom went silent. I added, which is why it can also be my choice to stop. She changed the subject immediately. Your father is under enough stress. Please don't call him again tonight. I wasn't planning to. We ended the call without resolving anything. Afterward, I walked into the kitchen and found Ethan making pasta. He glanced at my face and turned the stove down. Your mom? Apparently they don't want to burn through everything they built. He waited. I asked what they're preserving it for. And? Family. He lifted one eyebrow. Helpful. Very. I took a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water. Ethan said, do you think they're hiding something? I thought about it. I don't know. That answer mattered. I did not know. I was angry enough by then that it would have been easy to invent motives. Maybe Dad wanted to leave Lauren everything. Maybe they were funding some secret account. Maybe my sister had been asking them for money behind my back. But none of that was evidence. I had spent all day reminding myself not to do exactly what I accused Dad of doing. Build a conclusion first and make the numbers serve it. So I told Ethan the only thing I could prove. They have enough to pay their own bills. He nodded. And they created a 10-year plan that assumes I keep paying anyway. Another nod. And every time I ask what their money is being protected for, they stop answering. That sounds like the next question. It is. The next morning, I opened the packet again before sunrise. I had missed a page. Not literally. I had looked at it. But I had not understood it. It sat near the end of the projection, underneath a set of charts showing portfolio balances under different scenarios. One line ran almost flat across every year, as if the model had been designed to keep the number above a specific threshold. Next to it was a label, Legacy Floor, $1.65 million. I stared at it. Then I checked the other scenarios. Higher travel spending, still protecting the floor. Lower seller note income, still protecting the floor. Higher healthcare costs, withdrawals increased, but the plan tried to stay close to the floor. Remove my $4,200 a month, and the line started moving downward. Not toward zero, not toward disaster, toward a number Dad simply did not want it to cross. $1.65 million. That was the first moment I stopped asking whether my parents could afford their life. I started asking who they were saving that much of it for. Once I saw the words Legacy Floor, I stopped reading Dad's projection as a retirement plan and started reading it as a set of priorities. $1.65 million was not a minimum required to keep the lights on. It was not the amount needed to guarantee Mom's health care or protect them from losing the house. It was simply the number Dad had decided their investments should not fall below if he could help it. The more I looked at the model, the clearer it became that my $4,200 a month was not preventing financial disaster. It was preventing my parents from having to choose between maintaining their current lifestyle and preserving that number. I did not trust my first reaction, so I rebuilt the simplest version of the forecast myself. I used only the numbers Dad had sent me. No guesses about hidden accounts. No assumptions about what he had not shown me. No imagined conspiracy. In one column, I kept the $4,200 coming from me every month. In the other, I removed it. The difference was almost embarrassingly straightforward. Without my money, their investment balance declined faster. Not catastrophically. Not toward zero. It simply moved below the line Dad wanted to protect sooner than his preferred plan allowed. I checked the arithmetic again because anger makes people careless, and I did not want to be careless. Their recurring income covered a large portion of their expenses. The remaining gap could be covered by drawing more from the portfolio, trimming discretionary spending, or eventually moving into a less expensive house. Any one of those options would have been uncomfortable for my father, because all three required admitting that retirement meant spending some of what he had spent decades accumulating. But none of them meant ruin. Even without my monthly transfer, they still had a home worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, significant investments, seller note income from the business sale, and retirement income arriving every month. I remember sitting there with my calculator open and thinking about how often Dad had used the phrase fixed income. He said it in a tone that made retirement sound like a financial prison. What he really meant was that he had a preferred amount of recurring income and did not want his spending to force withdrawals beyond it. That was a legitimate preference. It just was not my obligation to finance. I kept going through the projection. The first line that made me stop was labeled Education Gifts. Underneath it were two recurring amounts, one attached to each of Lauren's children. I knew Mom and Dad contributed to college funds for the kids. There was nothing secret about that. They had mentioned it plenty of times, usually with some comment about how expensive college would be by the time the children were 18. What I had never known was that those contributions continued during the same months my parents were telling me they needed $4,200 from me to cover their household gap. I stared at those entries longer than I should have. The children had done nothing wrong. That mattered to me. I did not want to become the kind of person who looked at a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old and saw competition. They were my niece and nephew. I loved them. If my parents wanted to help with college, that was their choice. But I could not stop the question forming anyway. Why was money for their future considered untouchable, while money for mine had been treated as available? I moved down the page. There was a projected contribution toward a future home purchase for Lauren and her husband. It was several years out, marked as flexible, but the amount was large enough that it could materially change the kind of house they could afford. Another line covered a future vehicle replacement. A smaller reserve had a note beside it that read, "For Lauren, if needed." I searched my own name. Nothing. Not because I wanted a matching gift. I did not. That was the part I had to keep reminding myself of, because if I explained this badly, it could sound like sibling jealousy. It was not that Lauren had something and I wanted half. It was that my parents had built a financial system in which resources flowed toward Lauren because she was presumed to need them, while resources flowed from me because I was presumed not to. The distinction was everywhere once I saw it. Lauren's children had future expenses worth planning for. Lauren might need help buying a larger home. Lauren might need a replacement vehicle. Lauren might need an emergency reserve. My future appeared in only one form: income. I closed the file and walked away from my desk. For the first time since the wedding, I did not feel furious. I felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. There was something exhausting about discovering that the thing you thought was an emergency had actually been a philosophy. Dad believed money should be protected for the people who might need help later. He simply did not consider me one of those people. A few days later, Mom invited Ethan and me to brunch. I almost declined. Ethan said he would support whatever I chose, which was exactly why I chose to go. I did not want my parents later claiming I had refused every opportunity to speak to them. More importantly, my aunt Marianne and two of my father's siblings were going to be there. I had started to understand that Dad was telling the story of our conflict publicly, and I wanted to hear the version he was using when I was in the room. The brunch was at my parents' house on a Sunday in November. Mom had set out quiche, fruit, coffee, and the kind of serving dishes she only used when company came over. Everything looked normal enough that, for the first half hour, I wondered if I had imagined the tension. Dad asked Ethan about work. Mom showed me pictures from one of the kids' school events. Lauren arrived late with her husband and both children, apologized to everyone except me, and immediately sent the kids toward the den. Then Dad started talking about retirement. He did it casually. That was one of his skills. He rarely announced the subject he actually wanted to discuss. He circled it until someone else opened the door for him. My uncle asked whether Dad missed working. Dad laughed. I miss having predictable income. Someone said retirement was always an adjustment. Dad nodded. More of one than we expected. Things got a little tighter after Megan got married. My fork stopped halfway to my plate. Ethan looked at me but said nothing. There it was. Not after the business sale. Not after retirement. After Megan got married. The implication was subtle enough that anyone without context could fill in the rest themselves. I put my fork down. My temporary support ended, I said. Dad looked at me. That's what I said. No, you said things got tighter after I got married. They did, because a temporary arrangement ended. My Aunt Marianne glanced between us. Dad leaned back. Listen to how she talks. Temporary arrangement. Like we were a contractor she fired. I felt Ethan shift beside me, but I touched his knee under the table. I did not need him to defend me. You're the one who asked for a defined amount for a defined period, I said. No, Megan. You defined it. And you agreed. Mom stepped in. Can we please not do this at brunch? I looked at her. I didn't bring it up. Dad gave a small laugh. Nobody is attacking you. I didn't say anyone was. That's the attitude I'm talking about. Everything has become so formal with you. I could feel every person at the table trying not to stare directly at me. For one reckless second, I wanted to pull out my phone, open the projection, and ask Dad to explain his $1.65 million floor in front of everyone. I did not. That mattered. I was angry, but I still everything understood that financial information my father had sent privately did not become public property simply because he was being dishonest around relatives. He had not yet crossed the line that would justify me laying his documents on a family table. If I exposed everything there, I would have been escalating the situation for the satisfaction of winning the moment. So I kept it simple. I helped for 14 months, I said. That help ended. Mom and Dad still have income and assets. I'm not discussing the rest of their finances at brunch. Dad's mouth tightened. Lauren looked at her plate. My Aunt Marianne said, That seems fair. It was a small sentence, but Dad heard it. He changed the subject. Later, while Mom was clearing plates, I watched Lauren's son ask Dad whether he could go upstairs to find an old board game. Dad smiled at him in a way that softened his whole face. That was real. Whatever else was happening, he loved those children. I did not doubt that for a second. And because I knew that love was real, the financial plan became harder to dismiss as simple greed. Dad was not sitting in an office thinking, how can I take money from Megan and give it to Lauren? He was thinking something much easier to justify. The grandchildren will need help. Lauren has children. Megan is fine. Preserve what we can. Use what is available. The cruelty was not in one monstrous decision. It was in whose money had been categorized as available. On the drive home, Ethan asked, You almost said something. I almost showed them the projection. Why didn't you? Because Dad sent it to me, not the whole family. He's already telling the whole family you stopped supporting them. I know. That doesn't mean you have to protect him. I'm not protecting him. I looked out the window. I'm protecting myself from becoming the kind of person who uses private information because I'm angry. Ethan nodded. Fair. I thought about the children again. I found college contributions in the forecast. For Lauren's kids? Yes. While you were paying their monthly gap? Yes. He was quiet. I added. And a future house contribution for Lauren. A vehicle reserve, emergency money. What about you? There's nothing for me. He glanced over. I don't mean I want anything. I know. That's what makes this so hard to explain. No, he said. It actually makes it pretty easy. I turned toward him. He kept his eyes on the road. They weren't taking from you because they hated you. They were taking from you because they thought you could take it. I sat with that for the rest of the drive. The college entries bothered me more than the house contribution. Maybe because college had history attached to it. When I was 18, I got a scholarship that covered part of my tuition. It was not a full ride. I still needed money for the rest, and I remember sitting at our kitchen table with Dad while we worked through what I could earn during the summer, what I could borrow, and what small amount my parents would contribute. Dad had said, "You can handle the rest." At 18, I heard that as praise. I was proud that he trusted me. I worked. I borrowed less than many of my friends. I graduated. I paid the debt off. Years later, when Lauren was in college, my parents covered much more of her costs. I remember Mom explaining it casually. We don't want her starting adulthood buried in debt. I noticed the difference, of course. I was not blind, but I told myself the circumstances were different. Dad's business was doing better. They had more money by then. Lauren was less financially confident than I had been. Families were not spreadsheets. Everything did not have to match exactly. All of that could be true. The problem was the pattern underneath it. When I solved a problem without help, my family treated my success as evidence that withholding help had been correct. I could handle tuition, so I needed less. I could manage my career, so I needed less. I could buy my own home, so I needed less. I could contribute to retirement, so I needed less. Eventually, Megan can handle it. Stopped describing my ability. It became permission. That night, I opened Dad's packet again and highlighted the education contributions. I did not know yet whether Lauren had ever seen those numbers. That distinction mattered. There was a difference between being favored and knowingly participating in the mechanism that created the favoritism. So I did not call her. Not yet. Instead, I called Mom. She answered cautiously. Hi. I have one question. That sounds ominous. It shouldn't. She waited. What is the legacy floor for? There was silence. Then, what? In Dad's projection. 1.65 million. What is it supposed to protect? Megan, I don't know every label your father uses. You know what he's trying to preserve. Of course I do. Our security. You still have security if the portfolio goes below that number. That's easy for you to say. I'm not saying you should spend everything. I'm asking why that specific amount matters. Mom made an impatient sound. Your father believes we need a cushion. A cushion for what? Life. That's not an answer. Medical costs, emergencies, the house, anything. I looked at the projection. And the grandchildren? She hesitated. That hesitation answered more than the words that came next. Well, of course we think about them. And Lauren? She's our daughter. So am I. Nobody said you weren't. No. You just don't have anything set aside for me. The second I said it, Mom reacted exactly the way I expected. So this is about jealousy. No. It sounds like jealousy. I don't want you to set aside money for me. Then why are you asking? Because you're preserving money for people you think might need it, while asking me to spend money because you decided I don't. Mom was quiet. I continued before she could change the subject. I helped because Dad said there was a temporary cash flow gap. I did not agree to fund gifts for Lauren by substitution. You did not fund gifts for Lauren. Then explain the math. I am not discussing your sister's finances with you. You don't need to. I have Dad's projection. That changed her tone. What exactly did he send you? The packet he wanted me to read. Megan, I didn't ask for private account statements. He sent it. What does it say? You know what it says. I know generally what your father plans. I don't sit over every spreadsheet. Then answer generally. She sighed. The grandchildren are young. College gets more expensive every year. Lauren has 2 children to think about. We have always wanted to make sure they're okay. What about the house contribution? That isn't guaranteed. What about the vehicle reserve? Also not guaranteed, but planned. It's planning. That doesn't mean anything has been promised. Then why does my $4,200 show up every month for 10 years? Mom paused again. When she spoke, her voice was softer. Because your father likes predictability. No, he likes my predictability. You're making it sound ugly. I'm describing what's on the page. She sounded tired now. Megan, families help where the need is. There it is. What? The rule. What rule? Lauren needs. I can. That is not fair. Isn't it? She has children. I closed my eyes. The words themselves were ordinary. That was what made them dangerous. Mom, I know she has children. Then you understand why her situation is different. I understand that her expenses are different. That's what I mean. No, it isn't. I stood from my chair and walked toward the window. If Lauren needs help, you can help her. That's exactly what we're trying to do. With my money. No. Yes. If I cover your expenses so your investments don't have to go down, and then those investments fund her. That is what's happening. That is a very cynical way to look at family. It's arithmetic. Mom went quiet. Then she said, Your father and I are trying to preserve something for the next generation. I did not speak. She continued, perhaps because she thought she had finally found the explanation that would make me understand. We worked hard. Your father built that company from nothing. We would like there to be something left. The grandchildren will have college. Housing is getting more expensive. Lauren and her husband are doing fine. But raising 2 kids changes what fine means. And me? You're doing extremely well. The answer came so quickly she did not hear what was wrong with it. I did. What if I want children someday? Mom paused. You've never said you did. What if Ethan and I need something? You 2 make very good money. What if that changes? Megan, now you're inventing scenarios. I nearly laughed. We're talking about Dad's 10-year scenario. That's different. Why? Because some needs are already real. I looked down at the projection again. College. House. Car. Lauren if needed. The needs were not all real. They had simply been granted legitimacy in advance. Mine had not. I asked. If I had a child tomorrow, would that suddenly make my money less available to everybody else? That is not what I said. You didn't have to. Mom's patience snapped. I do not understand what you want from me. You keep insisting you don't want money. You don't want us to set anything aside for you. You say you're doing well, yet you're angry because we plan around the people who need more. I want you to understand that my ability to survive without help does not create a debt. That is dramatic. So was Dad's toast. Megan, and you agreed with him. Her silence came back. I let it sit there. Then I asked the question I had been trying to get to from the beginning. Who is the legacy floor really for? Mom spoke slowly this time. For the family, for emergencies, for the grandchildren. And Lauren? Another pause. She has children. There it was again. Not yes. Not no. Just the answer underneath every answer. Lauren has children. I thanked Mom for answering and ended the call. For a few minutes, I sat without moving. I had spent weeks trying to decide whether my parents were lying about being broke. That question no longer mattered, because they had never technically claimed they had nothing. They had done something subtler. They had described their own assets as protected. They had described my income as available. And they had built an entire moral argument around the difference. I opened my phone. Lauren's name was near the top of my recent messages. I typed, Did you know Mom and Dad were still putting money into the kids' college accounts while I was paying their monthly household gap? I read it twice. Then I sent it. The message showed delivered. A minute later, read. No answer. I went downstairs, made coffee I did not need, answered 2 work emails, and checked my phone again. Nothing. An hour passed. Then 2. Lauren was never someone who needed time to answer a question she thought was unfair. If she was angry, she answered immediately. If she thought I was wrong, She explained why before I finished the sentence. Her silence told me the question had landed somewhere else. Just after 8 that evening, my phone finally buzzed. Lauren had sent one line. "It's not as simple as you think." I stared at those words until the screen dimmed. I had not asked whether it was simple. I had asked whether she knew. Lauren did not explain what was supposedly so complicated that night. She ignored my next message, then sent me a text the following morning saying she had meetings all day and did not want to argue by phone. I almost pointed out that she had never had trouble arguing by phone before, but I let it go. If she wanted to talk face-to-face, I preferred that anyway. Text messages were useful for dates and facts. They were terrible places to untangle 30 years of family habits. We met in January at a small cafe halfway between my office and Lauren's house. I arrived first and chose a table near the back, where we would not have to lower our voices every time someone walked past. Lauren came in 10 minutes late, wearing a wool coat over work clothes, which told me she had actually gone into the office that morning instead of working from home. She ordered coffee, sat down, and immediately said, "Before you start, the college accounts are for the kids. I know. They're not money for me. I know that too. You made it sound like Mom and Dad are funneling money into my pocket while you pay their electric bill. I asked whether you knew they were contributing to the kids' accounts while I was covering their monthly gap. That's basically the same accusation." "No, it isn't." She took off her coat and draped it over the empty chair beside her. "Megan, they've been putting money into those accounts since the kids were babies." "That doesn't answer my question. What exactly do you want me to say?" "The truth would be convenient." Her eyes narrowed. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Talk like everyone else is stupid." I leaned back. "I asked a yes or no question, and I'm telling you it's more complicated." "Then make it complicated." Lauren wrapped both hands around her coffee. For a moment, she looked younger than 32. Not childish, just familiar. I had seen that expression at 15 when Dad asked who scratched the car, and she spent 5 minutes explaining the weather before admitting she had backed into a mailbox. She said, "Mom and Dad always told me they were helping you because Dad's business sale messed up their cash flow. That's what they told me too. So, why are you acting like I knew something you didn't? Because you said it wasn't that simple." "It isn't. Them putting money away for their grandkids does not mean they didn't need help with monthly expenses. They have almost $2 million invested." Lauren's hands stopped moving. "That was useful." "You knew that?" "I knew they had investments." "How much?" "I don't know their exact balances." "Did you know it was around 1.9 million? "No." She answered quickly enough that I believed her. I asked, "Did you know Dad had my $4,200 built into a 10-year projection?" Lauren blinked. "What?" "Every month, 10 years. That doesn't sound right." "I have his spreadsheet." "Well, maybe he was just modeling different possibilities." "That's what he says." "Then why are you saying it like it's some scheme?" "Because I never agreed to be one of his possibilities for 10 years. Lauren rubbed her forehead. "This is what I mean. You find one spreadsheet, and suddenly everything Mom and Dad have ever done is evidence." I could have told her about the legacy floor then. I could have told her about the projected house contribution and the vehicle reserve. Instead, I stayed with the simplest question. "Did you know they were trying to preserve their investments instead of using them for their own expenses?" I knew Dad doesn't like taking money out unless he has to. Neither do I. That's different. "Why?" "Because they're retired. And you're still earning." There it was, not the whole belief, but enough of its outline. I said, "If they need $4,200 a month, can you cover it?" She looked almost offended. "Of course not." "Why not?" "Because we don't have that kind of room in our budget. You and Mark both work. I work part-time. You could work full-time." Her face changed. "Oh, that's nice." "I'm asking." "No, you're judging." "I'm asking why I'm supposed to have $4,200 of room every month when you're allowed not to." "I have 2 kids, Megan." I let the sentence sit. Lauren continued. "Do you know what childcare costs? Summer camps? Clothes? Activities? Groceries? Everything gets more expensive every year. I'm aware children cost money." "No, you're aware in theory." That's not fair. Neither is sitting here with your salary and acting like our situations are identical. I never said they were identical. You keep asking why you're expected to have more room, because you do. Then this isn't about mom and dad needing help. Her mouth tightened. It's about me having more. That is not what I said. It's exactly what you said. No, Megan. I said you have more flexibility. And because I have more flexibility, I owe them $4,200 every month? I didn't say you owe them. Then why are you angry that I stopped? Because they're our parents. So are they only my parents financially? Lauren shook her head. You always do this. You reduce everything to a question where there's only one answer that makes you right. I considered that. She was not entirely wrong. I did like clean questions. Clean questions exposed evasions. But sometimes they also flattened things that were genuinely messy. So I tried again. What do you think I should do? Her answer came immediately. Help them. How much? I don't know. For how long? I don't know. What happens when Dad decides the amount needs to go up? Why would it? What happens when he decides the 10-year projection is now the plan? You're being dramatic. I'm asking for a limit. They're not a subscription service. I almost smiled. That sounds like Dad. She looked away. I watched her for a moment, then asked, if you genuinely believe family should cover their gap, why don't we split it? That's ridiculous. Why? Because $4,200 divided between us is still over $2,000 a month. Yes, I can't do that. I can. She looked back at me. I said, that's your entire argument, isn't it? No. Yes, not that they can't pay. Not that there was an emergency. Not that I promised forever. Just that I can afford it and you can't. You make almost $200,000 a year. My income is not a moral argument. It matters. Then so does Dad's portfolio. They're retired and still solvent. You really don't get it. Then tell me what I'm missing. Lauren stared at me, frustrated enough now that her careful answers began to disappear. Mom and Dad have to think about more than themselves. So do I. Like what? The question was so immediate I almost did not understand it. My life. That's not what I mean. My retirement. My house. Ethan. Whatever future we build, you and Ethan make more money than all of us. That still doesn't make my future free. Lauren leaned back and folded her arms. You don't have children, Megan. The cafe noise seemed to fade around me. She saw my face and immediately started to retreat. That came out wrong. No, finish it. I'm not saying your life doesn't matter. Then what are you saying? I'm saying you don't have two other people depending on every decision you make. So, my future matters less because it only belongs to me? That is not what I said. It's what your argument requires. No, it means your financial responsibilities are different. Different enough that Mom and Dad can protect money for your children using money from me? They are not using your money for my kids. If I pay their household expenses so their investments remain untouched, and they use those investments to fund your children, what would you call it? I would call it family helping family. I looked at her. That phrase has become incredibly convenient. Her face hardened. You know what? Maybe you should try raising 2 kids before you decide what's convenient. And maybe you should try sending $50,000 a year to people who stand up at your wedding and say they're only proud of your sister. That was Dad. Mom agreed. I know. And you sat there. What was I supposed to do? Stand up in the middle of your reception and fight with him? No. Then don't drag me into what they said. I'm not dragging you into the toast. You keep bringing it up. Because you're defending the system that made the toast possible. That doesn't even make sense. It did to me, but I knew explaining it while angry would turn into exactly what Lauren had accused me of doing. Building a question with only one acceptable answer. So I stopped. I took a drink of water and looked out the window for a moment. When I turned back, I said, I'm not asking you to apologize for having children. I'm not asking Mom and Dad to stop loving them. I'm not even asking them to stop contributing to college accounts. Then what are you asking? For all of you to stop acting like my ability to pay creates an obligation to pay. Lauren did not answer. I continued. If Dad had called me and said, Megan, we have $1.9 million invested, but I want to preserve as much as possible for Lauren and the grandchildren. Will you cover our household gap so we don't have to draw down the portfolio? What do you think I would have said? She looked at me cautiously. No. Exactly. Then you admit this is because of me. No. I admit I would not have agreed to that deal. But why? If you could afford it? Because I get to decide what I do with my money. That's such an individualistic way to look at family. I almost laughed. Lauren, you just spent 20 minutes explaining why your money cannot be used because you have children. That is not the same. Why not? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. When Lauren finally did, her voice was quieter. I didn't ask them to do any of this. That was the first thing she had said that I thought mattered more than the argument around it. I asked, do what? Plan around you. I went still. Plan around me how? She noticed her mistake. I mean generally. No, you said you didn't ask them to plan around me. That's not what I meant. What did you mean? I meant I never told Dad to take money from you. Did Dad tell you he was? He didn't say it like that. My anger cooled almost instantly. Not because I felt better. Because now I was listening. How did he say it? Lauren glanced toward the counter as if she were suddenly interested in the pastry case. Lauren, he said you were helping. When? I don't remember. Before or after he showed you the college plan? She looked back at me sharply. I never said he showed me a plan. You didn't have to. You're doing it again. What? Interrogating me. Because every time I ask a direct question, you answer one beside it. She grabbed her bag. This conversation is going nowhere. Then answer one thing before you leave. She stopped. Did you know my monthly payment was helping Mom and Dad avoid using their investments? Lauren stared at me. Finally, she said, I knew you were helping them. I knew Dad wanted to protect their retirement. I did not know every detail. That was not my question. That is my answer. Then she stood. I did not stop her. I watched her put on her coat, shoulder her bag, and walk out of the cafe. For the first time since I had opened Dad's financial packet, I believed Lauren might be more involved than she was admitting. That did not mean she had designed the plan. I knew that. At least, intellectually, I knew it. Emotionally, the distinction became harder to maintain. On the drive back to work, I replayed the conversation until every pause started to feel meaningful. She knew Dad wanted to protect the investments. She knew I was helping. She knew the kids had college funds. She knew enough to become defensive the second I connected those facts. By the time I reached my office, I had started building a theory. Lauren had always benefited from my parents' belief that she needed more. Maybe she had encouraged them. Maybe the house contribution had been her idea. Maybe she had asked Dad to protect the college funds. Maybe the monthly payment from me had become part of the plan because Lauren had told them it should. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit, which should have warned me. I spent my professional life telling people that if every piece of data starts looking like proof of the same conclusion, you need to ask whether the conclusion came first. That evening, I told Ethan what Lauren had said. We were in the kitchen. He was chopping vegetables while I stood against the counter, still irritated enough that I had not taken off my work clothes. She knew. He glanced at me. Knew what? That Dad was protecting the investments while I was paying them. Did she say that? She said she knew he wanted to protect retirement and knew I was helping. That isn't quite the same. I frowned. Seriously? I'm asking. She got defensive about every question. I believe you. She said I don't have children. He stopped chopping. She said that? Yes. That was cruel. It was honest. Those are not mutually exclusive. I folded my arms. I think she's more involved than she's admitting. Maybe. Maybe? He put the knife down. Megan, what do you have? Dad's spreadsheet. That proves Dad planned it. She knew about the college money. That proves she knew your parents contribute to her kids. She knew I was helping. Everyone knew you were helping. She knew Dad wanted to protect the investments. That gets you closer. I stared at him. Why does it sound like you're defending her? I'm not. You are. No, I'm doing the annoying thing you normally do. What annoying thing? Separating what you know from what you think. I hated that enough to know he was right. He wiped his hands on a towel. You have evidence your father built a 10-year plan around your payment. Yes. You have evidence your mother thinks Lauren and the kids deserve more protection because you're financially stronger. Yes. You have evidence Lauren benefits from that. Yes. And now you have evidence she knew some version of the arrangement existed. Yes. Do you have evidence she created it? I did not answer. Do you have evidence she told your dad to keep taking your money? No. Then don't give her credit for your dad's work until you have it. I looked away. That sounds like defending her. It's defending you. From what? Being wrong when you finally decide what you're going to do? That shut me up. Ethan picked up the knife again. After a moment, he said, "You can be furious with Lauren for what she actually did. You don't need to turn her into the mastermind for it to count." I sat at the kitchen table. I hate that she said I don't have children. I know. She said it like that, answers everything. It probably answers something. I looked at him. What? Maybe why your parents can convince themselves this is fair. I thought about Mom saying some needs were already real. Dad saying I could afford it. Lauren saying she had 2 kids. They were all making the same argument from different directions. I had fewer visible dependents. Therefore, I had more capacity. Therefore, asking more of me was not taking more from me. It was simply distributing responsibility efficiently. You could make almost anything sound reasonable if you picked the right words. That night, long after Ethan went upstairs, I sat at the table with Dad's projection open again. I searched for Lauren's name, the house contribution, the vehicle reserve, the notes about the children. I caught myself reading each line as if I were trying to prove she had designed it. So I stopped. I closed the file. The next morning, I wrote 3 headings on a page. What Dad decided. What Mom defended. What Lauren knew. The first column was easy. Dad had built the projection. Dad had inserted my payment. Dad had created the legacy floor. Dad had projected gifts. The second was almost as easy. Mom knew the money was being preserved. Mom believed Lauren's children justified different treatment. Mom believed my capacity made additional burden acceptable. The third column was embarrassingly short. Lauren knew I was helping. Lauren knew Dad wanted to preserve investments. Lauren knew about the children's college accounts. That was it. Everything else I had imagined belonged somewhere else. Posible. Not proven. I wrote those 2 words beneath the list. It annoyed me. It also calmed me down. For several days, nothing changed. Then Dad decided to change the battlefield. He started sending me messages that looked reasonable if you read them alone. Your sister has never made us feel guilty for helping her children. Lauren understands that family responsibilities aren't always equal. You should think about why she can accept help without turning everything into a transaction. I did not respond to most of them. The messages told me more about Dad than Lauren. He was not merely comparing us anymore. He was trying to make Lauren the standard by which my behavior should be judged. Then Lauren texted me late one afternoon. "Did you tell Dad I'm stealing money from you?" I stared at the screen. "No. He says you think every dollar they spend on my kids is money taken from you." I never said that. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then Lauren sent me a screenshot. It was a text from Dad. "Dad, Megan has convinced herself every dollar for your kids is somehow money stolen from her. Don't let her make you feel guilty. You've never complained about doing your part for this family." I read it twice. Then I sent Lauren a screenshot from my own phone. Dad had written to me 2 days earlier. "Your sister never complains about helping family. Maybe ask yourself why you're the only one keeping score." Lauren called. I answered. "What the hell is he doing?" "That's a good question." "I never told him you said anything about the kids stealing from you. I never told him you complained." She was quiet. For one brief moment, we were not opposing sides. We were 2 daughters looking at evidence that our father had been telling each of us a slightly different version of the other. Lauren said, "He's upset. That doesn't make the texts imaginary." "I know. He wants us arguing about each other instead of asking him about the plan. I don't know if he's doing that on purpose." "Neither do I. I meant it." That was different from how I would have answered a week earlier. Lauren sighed. "This entire thing is insane. It doesn't have to be." "How? Tell me what you actually know." "I already did." "No. You told me what you didn't know." She did not answer. Lauren, I'm not asking whether you designed Dad's spreadsheet. I don't think you did. There was a pause. You don't? No. Then why have you been acting like I did? Because I was angry. That surprised both of us. I continued before I could take it back. And because I think you knew enough to ask questions you didn't ask. Her voice cooled again. There it is. Yes. At least you admit what this is about. I'm trying to find out what it's about. You already decided. No, I decided Dad built the plan. I haven't decided how much you knew. I told you, not much. Then help me understand. She was silent. I asked, did Dad ever show you any part of his retirement projections? Another silence. Finally, not the whole thing. My hand tightened around the phone. What part? It wasn't like he sat me down with some financial presentation. What did he show you? A screenshot once. Maybe more than once. I don't remember. What was on it? Numbers. I closed my eyes. Lauren, I genuinely don't remember every line. What was the conversation about? The kids. College. Maybe the house. Just future stuff. When? I don't know. Last year sometime. Before the wedding? Yes. How long before? Months. I stood up from my desk and walked toward the window. Did my name appear on it? She hesitated. I think so. How? I don't know. Lauren. Dad was explaining how the plan worked. What plan? His retirement plan. Family stuff. I don't know what he called it. And my name? I said I don't remember. I did not believe that part. But I did believe something else. She was finally close enough to the truth to be frightened of it. I said, if you find the screenshot, send it to me. Why? Because I want to see what Dad told you before he told me. I'm not sending you private messages so you can build another case. You just sent me one. That was different. How? Because he was lying about what you said. And if he was lying to you about what I agreed to? Lauren said nothing. I waited. Finally, she said, I have to pick up the kids. Then she hung up. I did not contact her again. 2 nights later, just after 10, my phone buzzed while Ethan and I were watching television. Lauren had sent a message. You were wrong about one thing. Dad was the one planning all of this. Not me. Below it was a screenshot of an old text thread. I opened it. The first messages were about college contributions and what Dad called the long-term family plan. Lauren had apparently asked whether there would still be enough room for some future help if she and Mark needed a larger house. Dad had reassured her. Then I saw my name. Lauren had written, does Megan keep the same amount after she gets married? Dad's answer was directly underneath it. I'll handle Megan. I read the exchange again. Lauren had sent the screenshot to prove she was not the architect. And she was right. Dad was. But she had accidentally answered the question I had been asking from the beginning. She had known enough to wonder whether my marriage might interrupt the money. I stared at the screenshot long enough for Ethan to notice I was no longer watching the television. What happened? I handed him my phone. He read the exchange once, then again. Does Megan keep the same amount after she gets married? I'll handle Megan. Ethan gave the phone back without commenting. That's not what I expected, I said. What did you expect? I thought she knew less. He waited. I looked at Lauren's message above the screenshot. You were wrong about one thing. Dad was the one planning all of this. Not me. The uncomfortable part was that she was right. I had been wrong. Not about the existence of the plan. Not about Lauren benefiting from it. But I had spent several days moving her closer and closer to the center of something I did not have evidence she had created. The screenshot corrected that. Dad had built the machine. Mom had defended the logic that kept it running. Lauren had known the machine existed, benefited from what it protected, and chosen not to ask whether I had ever agreed to power it. Those were different roles. They did not carry identical responsibility. That distinction mattered to me, even when I was angry. I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed 3 words. Architect. Enable. Beneficiary. Ethan leaned over. What are you doing? Correcting my model. He smiled faintly. There she is. Dad built the plan. Yes. Mom knew what the money was being protected for and kept telling me Lauren had greater needs. Yes. And Lauren knew enough to ask whether the payment would continue after I got married. Yes. I set the phone down. She didn't design it. No. But she knew the arrangement affected what Dad could preserve for her. That seems fair. I hated how much better I felt once the categories were accurate. Not less hurt. Just steadier. I had spent my entire career learning that a wrong explanation does not become useful just because the result makes you angry. If I was going to hold my family accountable, I wanted to hold each person accountable for what they had actually done, not what would make the story cleaner. I texted Lauren, "When did you first see Dad's projection?" She did not answer that night. The next morning she sent, "I don't remember exactly. Around a year before the wedding." I checked the date. That meant she had seen some version of Dad's long-term planning, while I was still sending money under what I believed was a temporary extension. I wrote back, "Did Dad tell you I had agreed to keep paying?" She answered faster this time. "He said you were fine with it." I stared at those words. Fine with it. Not that I had agreed for 10 years. Not that I had committed indefinitely. Fine with it. That was exactly the kind of phrase Dad liked because it sounded specific without containing anything you could verify. I called Lauren. She answered with a tired, "What? You said Dad told you I was fine with it." "Yes." "What exactly did he say?" "I don't know. It was a year ago. You remembered enough to ask whether marriage would change the amount." There was silence. "I was asking because Dad was talking about future planning. Why would my wedding affect his retirement planning?" "I don't know. You did know enough to ask." "Megan, I already told you I didn't design the spreadsheet." "I believe you." That silenced her. "You do?" "Yes." "Then why are we still doing this?" "Because not designing it isn't the same as not knowing." She sighed. "I knew you were helping. Dad said you were okay with it. I had no reason to assume he was lying. You had one easy way to find out." "What?" "Ask me." Lauren did not answer. I continued. "You had my number." That sounds so simple now. It was simple then. No, it wasn't. You and Dad have always had your own weird thing about money and control. I didn't want to get in the middle. You were already in the middle. The plan had money marked for your children and your house. I didn't make him put that there. I know. Then stop saying it like I did. I'm not. Yes, you are. No. I'm saying you saw a plan where my payment made your future help easier, and you chose not to verify whether I had agreed to it. Lauren's breathing changed on the other end of the phone. That is a completely different accusation. Yes. And you think that makes me some terrible person? I think it made not asking very convenient. That's not fair. Maybe not. I paused. But it's accurate. She said nothing. I asked, "If Dad had shown you a plan where $4,200 came from your account every month for 10 years so I could get help with a future house, would you have asked whether you agreed?" "That's not the same." "Why?" "Because I couldn't afford that." There it was again. Not because consent mattered. Because affordability did. I said, "That is exactly the point." Lauren groaned. "You turn everything into a trap." "I'm not trapping you. You keep giving the same answer. You make more, so yes, people assume you can do more." Assume. I didn't mean. No, that's the word. She stopped. I lowered my voice. That is what this whole thing is. Dad assumed. Mom defended the assumption. You benefited from the assumption. I did not ask for your money. I know. Then what do you want from me? I wanted you to ask whether it was mine to give. The line went quiet. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lauren said, "I should have asked." It was not an apology. Not yet. But it was the first time she had said anything that did not redirect responsibility somewhere else. I could have pushed. I did not. Instead, I said, "Yes." She ended the call soon after. For the next few days, I tried to leave the issue alone. Dad did not. He sent increasingly polished messages, the kind that would have sounded reasonable to anyone who did not know the numbers. "Your mother and I never imagined our own daughter would make us justify every expense. We did not raise you to treat family like a balance sheet. Marriage should add to a family, not separate you from it." I responded to none of them. Then my Uncle Robert called, Dad's younger brother. Robert and I were not especially close, but we had always gotten along. He worked in commercial insurance, had a dry sense of humor, and rarely involved himself in family arguments. When I saw his name, I assumed somebody was sick. Hey, Uncle Robert, do you have a minute? That depends. He laughed once. Fair. Then his tone changed. I talked to your dad last night. I closed my laptop. What did he tell you? That retirement hasn't gone the way he expected, that you were helping with expenses and stopped after the wedding. I waited. He said you were angry because of the toast. There's more to it than that. I figured. That surprised me. Why? Because Thomas has been my brother for 65 years. I almost smiled. Robert continued. He also said Ethan thinks you shouldn't be supporting them. That is completely false. Okay. Ethan has never told me to stop. Good to know. What else did Dad say? Robert hesitated. He said you're jealous of what they've done for Lauren's children. I closed my eyes. There it was. Dad had changed the story again. The problem was no longer that I had ended temporary support. Now I was a childless woman resentful of money going to children. That version was vicious, precisely because it sounded plausible enough to people who did not know me well. I said, Did he tell you he has almost $2 million invested? Robert went quiet. No. Did he tell you my payment is listed in a 10-year projection? Another pause. No. Did he tell you the same projection includes a legacy floor designed to preserve most of those investments while they continue gifts for Lauren and her kids? No. I heard him shift. Megan, I'm not asking you to tell me their private finances. I know. I'm telling you because Dad made the finances part of his accusation against me. That's fair. I rubbed my forehead. I didn't stop because Ethan told me to. I didn't stop because I hate Lauren's children. I stopped because the original agreement expired, and I found out Dad had converted temporary help into something he assumed would continue indefinitely. Robert was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, That sounds very different from what I heard. That's why I'm tired. He did not tell me I was right. I appreciated that. He just said, I think your dad wants the family to pressure you. I think so too. After we hung up, I sat in my office staring at the wall. Until that call, I had been able to tell myself Dad was venting. Families complain. Parents exaggerate. People tell versions of stories that make themselves look better. But this was no longer just venting. He was recruiting. He was turning relatives into leverage. And the thing that made me angriest was not even that he was lying about me. It was that he knew exactly which version would hurt my credibility most. He knew if he said, Megan had a temporary agreement and decided not to renew it, nobody would care. So he said marriage changed me. Ethan controlled me. I resented my sister. I was punishing retired parents. Every version moved attention away from the one question he still had not answered. Why had he built his retirement plan around money I never promised? That night, I opened a blank document. Ethan was sitting beside me on the couch reading. What are you doing? Making something boring? He looked over. That sounds ominous. A timeline. How boring. 2 pages. Terrifying. I smiled despite myself. I did not want a 20-page financial dossier. That would make me look like I was preparing a prosecution. I wanted something any reasonable person could read in 5 minutes. At the top, I wrote the date Dad sold the business. Then June 2024. Temporary support begins. $4,200 monthly. 6 months review. December 2024. 6-month extension. June 2025. Original extension ends. July and August. Megan voluntarily continues 2 additional months through wedding period. August 23. Wedding. Automatic support ends. Then I attach the relevant pieces. The original email. Dad's reply. Mom's bridge nothing more. My bank transfer history. The page from the 10-year family projection showing family support $4,200 monthly. The legacy floor. The pages listing college contributions and projected support for Lauren. Then Lauren's screenshot. Does Megan keep the same amount after she gets married? I'll handle Megan. I looked at the document. Everything important fit on 2 pages because the story itself was not complicated once you removed the guilt. Temporary help had become an assumption. My parents wanted to preserve their assets. Their plan protected future benefits for Lauren and her children. Nobody asked whether I agreed to finance that plan. That was it. Ethan looked over my shoulder. Are you sending this? No. Good. I glanced at him. You think I shouldn't? I think if you send it to everyone now, your dad gets to say you escalated. I nodded. That's what I was thinking. So why make it? Because I'm tired of trying to remember which lie he told which person. That answer was true. The document also did something else. It gave me a line. Until then, every conversation had been emotional enough that the subject could shift whenever Dad wanted. From money to loyalty. From the wedding to Lauren. From Lauren to children. From children to retirement. From retirement to Ethan. The timeline would not let him move the dates. It would not let him change 6 months into forever. It would not let him turn my cancellation into an attack that came out of nowhere. But I made myself one promise. I would not use it unless Dad forced the conflict into a room where his version was already being presented as fact. I was not going to send it to cousins. I was not going to post it online. I was not going to email the family with a subject line like, "The truth." I wanted a corrected record, not an audience. That distinction became harder to maintain as February went on. Mom stopped calling me directly and began sending messages through relatives. Your mother is worried. Your father is under stress. They don't understand why you're doing this. Each time, I gave the same answer. They are financially solvent. A temporary arrangement ended. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes the person calling tried to argue. I stopped arguing back. One Sunday afternoon, Aunt Marianne asked me whether I had considered giving them half of what I used to send. Why half? To meet in the middle. Middle of what? She laughed awkwardly. I don't know. I'm just trying to help. I know. But that's the problem. Everyone is negotiating a number nobody asked whether I owed. Marianne went quiet. Then she said, Your dad really made it sound like you just stopped out of nowhere. That isn't what happened. I'm starting to see that. Those small shifts mattered. Not because I needed everyone on my side. Because Dad was losing control of the simplicity of his story. Then, near the end of February, a group message appeared on my phone. Dad had created it. Mom, Lauren, Robert, Mariana, 2 cousins, another aunt, Ethan and me. The message read, This has gone on long enough. We are going to sit down as a family and settle this like adults. Sunday, 6 o'clock. Your mother is making dinner. No excuses. I read it twice. Then Ethan's phone buzzed beside mine. He looked over. Well, I set my phone down. He wants a tribunal. Looks like it. He thinks they'll pressure me. Probably. I looked toward the laptop on the dining table. The 2-page timeline was saved there. Ethan followed my eyes. You going? Yes. Sure? Yes. He nodded. Then he asked, What do you want out of that room? The question stopped me. It would have been easy to say I wanted Dad embarrassed. Part of me did. I wanted him to experience one fraction of what it felt like to sit at my own wedding while strangers applauded him for telling me I was the daughter he was not proud of. I wanted Lauren uncomfortable. I wanted Mom forced to hear herself explain why my money counted as available while hers did not. Those were real feelings. They were also terrible goals. Because if humiliation became the goal, I would walk into that dinner willing to use anything that hurt. I had spent too much time criticizing my family for doing exactly that. So I answered carefully. I want Dad to lose the right to lie about what happened. Ethan considered it. That's different. It needs to be. The day before the dinner, I printed the timeline. 2 copies. No dramatic binder. No folders labeled evidence. Just 4 sheets of paper total. I put them in my bag. On Sunday evening, Ethan and I drove to my parents' house in near silence. It was the same house where Dad had explained college costs to me when I was 18. The same house where Lauren had brought her first baby home from the hospital, and Mom had turned the guest room into a nursery within a week. The same house where I had spent 14 months sending money because I believed my parents needed help crossing a temporary financial bridge. Now Dad had invited the family there to decide whether I had failed some moral test. When we pulled into the driveway, Ethan turned off the engine, but did not open his door. One more time, he said, What do you want? I looked at the house, then at me bag, for him to tell the truth. And if he doesn't? I put my hand on the door handle. Then I will. I walked into my parents' house carrying 2 pages that Thomas Davis had never expected anyone else to read together. Dad had arranged the dining room like he was hosting a holiday instead of an intervention. The long table was set with Mom's good dishes, cloth napkins, water glasses, wine, and enough food for twice the number of people coming. He always believed presentation mattered. If the table looked civilized, then whatever happened around it could be called reasonable. Uncle Robert was already there when Ethan and I walked in. Aunt Marianne sat beside him. 2 of my cousins were near the kitchen doorway, speaking quietly with Mom. Lauren was at the far end of the room with Mark, her husband. She looked at me once, then down at her phone. Dad came out of his office carrying a glass of water. "Good," he said. "Everybody's here." No hello. No acknowledgement that I was his daughter walking into the house. Just confirmation that his audience had arrived. Ethan took my coat. I kept my bag. Dad noticed. His eyes dropped to it for half a second, then returned to my face. "Let's eat first." That told me something. He wanted control of the sequence. Dinner first. Normal conversation. Then the problem. On his terms. I sat beside Ethan. Mom had made roast chicken, potatoes, green beans, and a salad nobody touched. For the first 20 minutes, everyone made heroic efforts to talk about anything except why we were there. Robert mentioned a client. One cousin talked about school schedules. Mom asked Ethan how work was going. Lauren's husband discussed traffic near his office. Dad nodded through all of it as if he were patiently waiting for children to finish playing. I barely ate. I had the 2-page timeline in my bag beside my chair. I had spent the entire drive reminding myself that I did not need to prove my parents were bad people. I did not need to win every argument. I did not need anyone at that table to like me when we left. I needed one thing. The facts had to stop changing. After dessert plates were cleared, Dad leaned back and folded his hands. "All right," he said. "We're going to deal with this." Nobody spoke. He looked directly at me. "Your mother and I did not want to involve the rest of the family." Robert shifted in his chair. I almost smiled. Dad had spent weeks involving the rest of the family, but, he continued, Megan has turned a private disagreement into something that is affecting everyone. I said nothing. He looked around the table. "For those who don't know the whole story, your mother and I had some financial changes after I retired. Megan offered to help us. We were grateful. Then, after the wedding, she got upset about something I said in a toast and immediately cut us off. There it was. Clean. Simple. Almost elegant. He had removed 14 months of dates, agreements, extensions, projections, and assumptions, until only one image remained. Retired parents helped by a daughter who became angry and withdrew support. Dad continued, "We're not asking for charity. We're not asking anyone to bankrupt themselves. We're asking for what families have always done. The people who have more help when others need more." Mom nodded. Lauren stared at the table. Dad said, "And frankly, I am tired of being treated like some irresponsible man who cannot manage money. I built a business from nothing. I supported this family for decades. I put both my daughters through school as best I could. I have earned the right to make decisions about retirement without being cross-examined by my own child." Nobody interrupted him. I understood why. He sounded good. That was the dangerous thing about Dad. He rarely made a weak argument when a stronger one could contain the same manipulation. When he finished, he looked at me. "Well?" I said. "Was the original agreement 6 months?" His expression changed almost imperceptibly. "What?" "The financial support. Was the original agreement 6 months?" He exhaled through his nose. "Megan, this is exactly what I mean. It's a yes or no question. You offered to help. For 6 months?" Mom said, "Why does that matter now?" "Because Dad just told everyone I offered to support you and then suddenly stopped after the wedding." Dad leaned forward. "You did stop after the wedding?" "Yes, after 14 months. He waved one hand. "Because you chose to keep helping. For 2 additional months after the 12 we had agreed to." "This is ridiculous." I reached into my bag. I did not pull out the whole timeline. Not yet. I took one page from the original email exchange and placed it on the table. June of last year. $4,200 a month. 6 months, then review. Dad did not look at it. Robert did. Marianne leaned slightly forward. Dad said, "Nobody disputes there was an initial time frame. Good." I took out the December email. 6-month extension. Mom frowned. I said, "That ended in June." I continued voluntarily through July and August because the wedding was close and I didn't want another fight. Dad scoffed. "Listen to that. Another fight. We were your parents, not some obligation you were trying to get off your calendar." I looked at him. "Did I ever agree to be part of your 10-year projection?" That stopped him. Lauren lifted her eyes. Mom looked at Dad. Robert said, 10-year projection? Dad's jaw tightened. "It is a financial planning document." "I know." I pulled out the second page. At the top was the relevant section. 10-year family projection. I placed it beside the emails. Dad stared at it. "What are you doing?" "Answering your version of the story. That document was sent to you privately." "Yes." "You had no right to bring our finances into a family dinner." I looked around the table. "You told everyone here I cut off retired parents because I was angry about a toast." Nobody moved. I looked back at Dad. "You made the finances part of the accusation." His face reddened. "This is exactly the kind of cold, transactional behavior I've been talking about." "Then this should be easy to explain." I pointed to the row. Family support. $4,200 monthly. 10 years. Dad said, "It's an assumption." "I know. You work with projections. You know they require assumptions." "Yes. That does not mean anyone expected you to sign some legal contract." "Then why is my money the assumption?" He leaned back. "Because at the time we believed we could count on you. You could count on what I agreed to." "There you go again." "No, Dad. That is the entire issue." Mom stepped in. "Families don't divide things the way corporations do. Sometimes one person needs more help. Sometimes another person is in a position to give more." I turned toward her. "That is the rule? It is common sense. Help according to need?" "Yes." Dad nodded. "That's exactly what we've been trying to explain." I looked at Lauren. She knew what was coming. Her shoulders tightened. "Can you cover $4,200 a month for Mom and Dad?" Her eyes flashed. "Why are you dragging me into this?" "Can you?" "No." "Why not?" She gave a short laugh. "You know why? I want you to say it." "Megan, why can't you?" "I have 2 kids." I looked back at Dad. "Then your system wasn't giving according to need." He frowned. "It was taking from the person you decided was allowed to need nothing." Dad shook his head. "That is melodramatic." "No, it's your spreadsheet." Mom said, "Lauren has children. Of course her financial situation is different." "I know." "Then why are you pretending it isn't?" "I'm not." I slid the projection forward. "I'm saying you planned around that difference by making my income part of your retirement strategy without asking." Dad's voice became sharper. "We did not take your income. You assumed it. Because you were helping. For a defined period. You kept helping. Because I delayed the argument. That was your choice." "Yes." The room went quiet. I nodded. "That was my choice." I let the words sit. And stopping was also my choice. Mom looked frustrated. "This is why none of us can talk to you anymore. Every sentence becomes a technicality." I almost answered her, but Robert spoke first. "What exactly happens if Megan doesn't pay?" Dad looked at him. "That isn't the point. It seems fairly central." Dad's expression hardened. Robert continued. "Do you lose the house? Do you run out of money?" "No." "Then what?" Dad glanced at me. I knew he hated that Robert had asked the question instead of me. "The portfolio draws down faster." Robert nodded slowly. "How much faster?" Dad said, "This isn't an investment committee." I said nothing. Robert looked at the document. Then at me. I answered carefully. "Based on the numbers Dad sent me, roughly $50,000 more a year needs to come from their assets if spending stays the same." Marianne frowned. "So they can cover it?" "Yes." Dad cut in. "That is a gross oversimplification." I looked at him. "Then explain the missing part." He tapped the table with one finger. The missing part is that retirement assets are supposed to last. I agree. Markets go down, healthcare costs increase, homes need repairs. People live longer than they expect. I agree with all of that. Then stop acting like $1.9 million means we should start spending recklessly. I have never said that. That is exactly what you're saying when you reduce this to use your own money. No. I'm saying my money is not automatically the safer asset to spend. Dad opened his mouth, but Marianne spoke. What's the legacy floor? Silence. She had been reading the page. Dad's eyes went to me. I did not answer for him. Marianne pointed. This says 1.65 million. Dad said, it's a target. For what? Long-term security. I watched him. There it was again. The phrase built to sound final. Long-term security. Marianne asked, security for you and Linda? Of course, I said. And? Dad glared at me. Robert picked up the page. There are education gifts listed here. Mom's face changed. Dad said, those are planning assumptions. For Lauren's kids? Those children are not part of this argument. I spoke before Robert could. They aren't. Dad looked at me. The children have done nothing wrong. I pointed to the page. The adults who made the plan are… Lauren pushed her chair back slightly. I didn't make Dad's plan. I know. Dad said, then stop bringing her into it. I turned to him. You're the one who put her into it. That is enough. No. You called her the success story at my wedding. You compared me to her every time I asked about the money. You told relatives I was jealous of what you did for her children. You made her the moral argument for why I should keep paying. Lauren said, I never asked her to. Her voice was louder than I expected. Everyone looked at her. She continued, I never asked Megan to pay Mom and Dad's bills. I never told Dad to put her money in a spreadsheet. I didn't ask for any of this. I believed the first 2 sentences. The third was more complicated. I reached into my bag and pulled out the screenshot. I did not hand it to everyone. I placed it in front of Lauren. Her face changed as soon as she recognized it. I said, no, you didn't ask me to pay them. Dad shifted. Lauren looked at me. I pointed to her message. But you did ask whether I would keep doing it after I got married. Nobody spoke. Lauren looked around the table, then back at me. That is not the same thing. I know. I was asking Dad about his plan. I know. I wasn't asking him to make you pay. I know. She looked almost confused by my agreement. I continued. But you knew enough to understand that whether I kept paying affected the plan. I told you Dad said you were okay with it. And you never asked me. Lauren's face flushed. I should have. The words were quiet. Dad immediately stepped in. Lauren does not owe you an apology for trusting her father. I turned toward him. No. She owes me accountability for choosing not to ask when not asking benefited her. Lauren looked down. Dad said, this is unbelievable. Robert asked, Thomas, did Megan ever agree to 10 years? Dad's head snapped toward him. Stop calling it 10 years like it's a contract. That wasn't my question. Dad stared at his brother. For the first time that evening, he did not have a polished answer ready. Robert repeated it. Did she agree? Dad said. She had been helping consistently. Marianne asked. That's not the same as agreeing, is it? Mom's face tightened. This is turning into an attack. I looked at her. I didn't invite everybody. That landed. Dad stood. Enough. His chair scraped against the floor. I am not going to sit here while my own daughter humiliates us over money. My hands went cold. Not because he stood. Because of the word. Humiliate. I thought about the ballroom. About the applause. About looking at Mom. Do you agree? Completely. But I did not use it. I did not need to. I stayed seated. I'm not asking anyone here to choose sides. Dad laughed. That is exactly what this is. No, I'm asking you to stop telling people I abandoned you because of a toast. You did. I ended a financial arrangement that had already expired. After the toast. Yes. So stop pretending they're unrelated. I never said they were unrelated. That made him pause. I continued. The toast made me look at something I had delayed dealing with. It made me realize you felt comfortable taking automatic support from a daughter you could publicly say you weren't proud of. Dad stared at me. I said, "But even if you had praised me that night, the 10-year assumption still would have been wrong." The room became very still. That was the part I needed them to understand. I was not trying to rewrite the story into something cleaner than it was. The toast mattered. It hurt. It changed what I was willing to overlook. But the financial problem existed before the first glass was raised. Mom folded her arms. "So what do you want us to do? Pay your own expenses. That's it?" "Yes." Dad laughed again. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple, not easy." "Simple. You think selling investments in retirement is simple?" "I think deciding whether to sell investments is your decision. And if the market drops? Your decision. If healthcare costs go up? Your decision. If we have to change how we live? Your decision." Mom looked hurt. "You're our daughter." "Yes. And that means nothing?" "It means you can ask me for help." I pointed to the documents. "It does not mean you can build my help into your plan before you ask." Dad leaned forward over the table. "You really think you've got everything figured out because you printed 2 pages? No. I built that company before you knew what a mortgage was. I know. I supported this family. I know. I paid for things you never even knew cost money. I know. Then maybe one day you'll understand that families are not just a collection of individual accounts." I looked at him. "I already understand that." He waited. I said, "What I don't understand is why family stops being collective the moment the money belongs to you." His face hardened. Mom said, "That is cruel." "No, it's the question nobody has answered." Dad pointed toward the papers. "The assets you keep treating like some hoard are what your mother and I built over a lifetime. And the money I sent you came from what?" He did not answer. I continued, "You keep saying you earned the right to protect what you built. I agree." I placed my hand on the page showing my transfers. "So did I." Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Marianne asked Mom, "If the monthly gap was real, why were you still putting money into the kids' college funds?" Mom looked uncomfortable. "We have always contributed." "That isn't what I asked." Dad said, "Leave the grandchildren out of this." Marianne shook her head. "I'm not blaming the children, I'm asking about the plan." Mom looked at Dad. That glance told me she wanted him to answer. He did not. So she did. "We wanted to keep helping them." "With college?" "Yes." "And Lauren?" Mom hesitated. "Sometimes." I watched Dad close his eyes briefly. Mom continued, perhaps not realizing how much she was confirming. "Lauren has 2 children. They may need a larger home eventually. College is expensive. Cars break down. We wanted to make sure there was something available." I asked, "Available from where?" Mom looked at me. "From what we saved." "And how did you keep more of it saved?" She knew. Everyone at the table knew. Nobody needed a spreadsheet anymore. Mom said, "Because you were helping with expenses." The room changed. It was not dramatic. Nobody gasped. Nobody slapped the table. Nobody turned to me and apologized. But the story Dad had told could no longer fit inside the room. Robert leaned back. Marianne looked down at her hands. One of my cousins stopped pretending not to listen. Lauren stared at the table. Dad looked at Mom with open frustration. I did not smile. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. Because hearing Mom say it aloud did not make the truth sharper. It only made it impossible to call misunderstanding. Dad sat down again. "This is being twisted," Robert asked. "Which part?" Dad looked at him. "We helped Lauren because she has greater needs." Robert nodded. "Okay. And Megan was in a position to help us." "Okay. That is what family does." Robert looked at the papers. "Then why not say that to Megan when you asked?" Dad did not answer. Robert continued. "Why tell her it was a temporary cash flow problem if what you wanted was for her to subsidize the difference so you could preserve more money for Lauren and the grandkids?" Dad's face reddened again. "That is a deliberately hostile interpretation. It sounds like the math." Dad turned to me. "You've poisoned everyone against us." I almost laughed. "No. You came in here with documents. You invited them. You knew exactly what you were doing." "Yes." That stopped him. I continued. "I knew you were going to tell the same story you've been telling for months." I brought dates. You brought private finances. I brought the parts of your finances you used to accuse me. That does not make it right. No. I paused. It makes it necessary. Mom looked close to tears. I hated that. Not because I thought I was wrong. Because I still loved her. That was one of the ugliest things about family conflict. Being right did not make the other person's pain disappear, and their pain did not automatically make you wrong. I softened my voice. I don't want your house. Mom looked at me. I don't want your investments. I don't want the money you planned for Lauren. I don't want anything back that I already gave you. Dad folded his arms. Then what do you want? For you to stop treating my future as the flexible part of everybody else's plan. Nobody spoke. I looked at Lauren. The kids can keep every dollar you've already put aside for them. Then at Mom. If you want to keep helping them, that is your choice. Then Dad. But you pay for that choice with your money. His lips pressed into a thin line. You have no idea what that will require. I have a fairly good idea. You sent me the projection. That projection assumes we maintain the house. Then decide whether you want to maintain the house. Mom's eyes widened. Dad stared at me. Are you suggesting we sell our home? No. You just said. I said decide. That house is where you grew up. I know. Your mother and I plan to stay there. Then stay. With higher withdrawals. If that's what you choose. Dad leaned back and looked around the table as if appealing to an invisible jury. You all hear this, right? She's perfectly comfortable watching her parents burn through retirement savings or sell their house over $4,000 a month. I said, $4,200. He glared at me. I almost regretted correcting him. Almost. Then I remembered why precision mattered. Dad said, fine. He pushed his chair away from the table. Fine. If this is how you want to treat your parents, don't come crying when we have to sell the house. The old version of me would have reacted immediately. She would have heard threat, guilt, catastrophe. She would have pictured Mom packing boxes because of her. She would have calculated what $4,200 meant compared with the emotional cost of being blamed for the house. Then she would have paid. That was the pattern Dad was counting on. I looked at him. If you sell the house because keeping it costs more than you want to spend, that's your decision. His face changed. No shock. Something closer to disbelief. He had finally reached the place where the old lever was supposed to work. It did not. You really mean that? Yes. Mom whispered my name. I turned toward her. I'm not telling you to sell. I'm telling you, I won't buy the difference between the life you have and the amount of your own money you're willing to spend. Dad stood again. Then I think this conversation is over. I gathered the pages. Not dramatically. I did not leave copies behind. I had shown what I needed to show. Robert stopped me as I stood. Megan. I looked at him. He hesitated. I didn't know the arrangement had an end date. That's why I came. He nodded. Marianne looked at Mom but did not say anything. Lauren remained seated. For 1 second, our eyes met. There was no apology in her face. But there was something I had not seen before. Uncertainty. Dad walked toward the kitchen without saying goodbye. Mom stayed at the table. Ethan helped me with my coat. We left. Outside, the air had turned cold enough that I could see my breath faintly under the porch light. For the first few steps toward the car, I felt almost nothing. Then Ethan asked, "You okay?" I don't know. That was rough. I thought I'd feel better. You corrected the record. I know. That was what you wanted. Yes. He unlocked the car. I looked back at the house. The dining room lights glowed through the windows. I could see silhouettes moving inside. I think part of me wanted Dad to understand. Ethan opened my door. He may eventually. No. I shook my head. I mean understand tonight. That was never something you could control. I knew he was right. That did not make it less disappointing. On the drive home, my phone buzzed several times. I ignored it until we were parked in our driveway. One message was from Marianne. I'm sorry. Your dad made it sound very different. Another was from Robert. For what it's worth, I told Tom, after you left, that stopping payments is not the same thing as abandoning your parents. I read that one twice. Dad had spent months trying to make those two things identical. Apparently they no longer were. I did not answer immediately. I went inside, put the 2-page timeline back in the drawer of my desk, and closed it. For the first time since the wedding, I did not feel any need to collect more evidence. The facts were no longer the problem. Everyone who mattered had heard them. The next question was much simpler. What would my parents do when guilt no longer paid their bills? The first sign that the family dinner had changed anything came the next morning, and it was not an apology. Uncle Robert texted me before 8. For what it's worth, I told your dad again that you didn't abandon them. You stopped paying their bills. Those are not the same thing. I read the message twice before answering. Thank you. That was all I wrote. I did not ask what Dad had said in response. I did not ask whether Mom had cried after we left, or whether Lauren had defended me. I had spent too many months collecting reactions, as if enough of them might eventually tell me whether I had made the right decision. The numbers had already answered that. My parents could pay their own expenses. What they could no longer do was preserve every part of the life they preferred while sending the difference to my account. For the first few weeks after the dinner, very little happened that I could see. Dad stopped texting me. Mom sent one stiff message asking whether I had received a package she mailed. Lauren did not contact me at all. The silence felt strange because I had gotten used to someone in the family trying to pull me back into the argument every few days. Ethan noticed it too. One night in early April, we were eating dinner when he said, "Your phone hasn't buzzed once." I noticed. "Do you miss it?" "No." He smiled. I took another bite before admitting, "I keep expecting something." "That doesn't mean you want it." "I know. The strange thing about removing yourself from a family system is that your body does not immediately believe the system is gone." I would see Mom's name flash across my screen and brace for a bill before I even opened the message. I would hear from a cousin and wonder what version of the story Dad had told them. Nothing dramatic had to happen for me to feel prepared for impact. Then Mom called one Saturday afternoon. She did not mention the dinner. She did not mention my father. She said, "We canceled Savannah." I was confused for a second. What? The trip. We were going in May. I remembered. She and Dad had planned a few days in Savannah before the heat got too bad. "I'm sorry." "Well, it is what it is." Her tone suggested it was not, in fact, merely what it was. I waited. "We're cutting back." "Okay. We thought you should know." I understood the invitation. Mom wanted me to ask how bad things were. She wanted me to hear canceled travel and imagine something catastrophic happening behind it. I did not take the bait. "That sounds reasonable if you want to reduce withdrawals." She was quiet. Then she said, "It's interesting that you can say that so casually. I'm not happy you canceled a trip. You don't sound upset. What would you like me to do?" "I don't know, Megan." That answer was more honest than most of the things we had said to each other lately. I softened my voice. "Mom, you still have choices." "We know. That's all I'm saying." She exhaled. "Your father gave up part of his club membership too." I almost asked which part. Dad had joined the country club years earlier through business contacts, and even after retirement he still used the dining room and golf facilities more than he admitted. Instead, I said, "Okay." Mom waited for sympathy to become an offer. It did not. Eventually, she changed the subject and asked about Ethan. After we hung up, I stood at the kitchen window for a while. I did feel bad. That was the part people on the outside rarely understood. Setting a boundary does not remove affection. I could believe my parents had exploited an arrangement and still dislike seeing them disappointed. I could understand why Mom hated changing plans she had looked forward to and still refused to pay for those plans indirectly. If anything, guilt became harder once the conflict stopped being abstract. A spreadsheet was easy. Mom canceling a trip was human. Dad giving up something he enjoyed was human. That did not make those things emergencies. A few days later, Dad complained in the family group chat about how retirement apparently means cutting everything you worked for. Nobody responded for almost an hour. Then Uncle Robert sent a joke about Dad surviving without weekday golf, and one of my cousins changed the subject. Before the dinner, someone would probably have called me privately afterward and asked whether I could meet them halfway. Nobody did. That was the first real consequence Dad suffered that had nothing to do with money. His story no longer moved through the family without resistance. He could still be angry. He could still say I was cold. But he could not say I had left them without resources and expect everyone to accept it automatically. By May, the cuts had reached Lauren. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was walking from a job site trailer toward my car when her name appeared on the screen. I considered letting it ring, then answered. "What's wrong? Why does something have to be wrong? Because you haven't called me in months." "That's not true." "It's close enough." She went quiet. I unlocked my car but did not get inside. "What happened?" "Dad stopped the college deposits." For a second, I did not understand. Then I did. "The kids' accounts?" "Yes." "How do you know?" "Mom told me. They're cutting them back for now." I leaned against the car. Okay. What do you want me to say?" "I don't know, maybe something other than okay." "Lauren, they're Mom and Dad's contributions. They've been making them for years." "I know. They told us they would keep doing it." "Then talk to Dad." I did. "And?" "He said they have to prioritize their own expenses now." There was something so perfectly circular about that sentence that I almost admired it. "And he's right." Lauren laughed without humor. "Of course you think so. What would you prefer?" "You know exactly what I mean." "No, I want you to say it. You stopped paying them and now the kids are losing money." I closed my eyes. "No." "Yes." "No, Lauren. This did not happen because I stopped paying. It happened because they started paying." She did not respond. I continued. "They were contributing to the kids while I covered part of their household expenses. Now they're covering their household expenses. And they decided the college deposits are something they can reduce. That's a technical way to describe it. It's an accurate way. They're your niece and nephew. I know who they are. You don't care that this affects them?" "I care. That still doesn't make me responsible for replacing money Mom and Dad voluntarily contributed." "It's easy for you to say that when it isn't your kids." I almost reacted to the familiar argument, but I stopped myself. We had already had that fight. Repeating it would not create a better answer. "I'm not doing this again." "Doing what?" "Explaining why having children doesn't give everyone else a claim on my income." "That is not what I said." "It keeps being what you mean." She sighed. "Dad says they're having to pull more from investments every month." "That was always an option." "You really don't care." "I care enough not to lie to you." I opened my car door. If Dad had no money, this would be a different conversation. He does. Mom does. They are choosing what they want to spend and what they want to stop funding. Lauren said nothing. I added, "That's what a budget is." She ended the call without saying goodbye. For the rest of the afternoon, I thought about those college accounts. I wondered if I should offer to contribute directly to them someday, not because anyone expected me to, but because I loved the kids. Then I caught myself. That was exactly how the old pattern rebuilt itself. Not through one giant demand. Through 100 reasonable little impulses. Mom and Dad stop a contribution. Megan can afford it. The children did nothing wrong. Megan steps in. Then 5 years later, nobody remembers that she volunteered. They remember only that she always handled it. I decided I would not make any decision about the kids' college money while guilt was still in the room. If I ever helped them in the future, it would be because I chose a gift, not because I inherited a discontinued obligation. Dad tested that boundary directly 2 weeks later. He emailed me an insurance renewal notice for the house. The subject line read, "Actual emergency." I opened it. It was the annual homeowner's insurance premium. Nothing about the bill was unexpected. The policy had renewed every year for as long as my parents had owned the house. Because the mortgage was nearly paid off, they handled the premium themselves rather than through an escrow account. Dad had attached the invoice and written, "This is what I meant when I said expenses don't stop just because you decide an agreement is over." I called him. He sounded surprised that I had. "So you got it." I did. "It's due this month. I can see that. We didn't budget for this level of increase." "How much did it increase?" He told me. The increase was noticeable, but nowhere near $4,200. I asked, "Was the renewal unexpected?" The amount was. The bill itself? "Megan, was it unexpected?" "No." "Then it's not an emergency. You don't get to decide that. You labeled it an emergency and sent it to me because it affects our cash flow. So does groceries. That is a ridiculous comparison. No. The point is that a predictable annual expense doesn't become an emergency because you don't like which account has to pay it. Dad went quiet. I could hear him breathing. Then he said, "You've become unbelievably smug. I'm not enjoying this. You certainly sound like you are. I'm being clear. There's a difference between clarity and cruelty." I agree. Apparently not. I leaned back in my chair. Dad, if the house costs more than you want to spend, then the house is part of the problem. That is my home. I know. It is your mother's home. I know. You grew up there. I know that too. And you can say this like it's an asset on a spreadsheet. It is both. That angered him more than anything else. Easy for you. You're 38. You think you can just start over forever. I don't think moving would be easy for you. Then stop suggesting it. I didn't suggest anything. You sent me an insurance bill because you don't want to pay it. I sent you an example of what we're dealing with. And I'm telling you it's a normal cost of owning that house. Dad's voice dropped. So that's it. What? You don't care whether we can keep our home. I had heard that version before. At the family dinner, it might still have worked. Now, I recognized the substitution immediately. Keep our home was replacing. Keep our preferred level of withdrawals. I care whether you have a safe place to live. He said nothing. That's not the same as guaranteeing that you stay in the most expensive version of it. He hung up. I did not call back. A week later, Mom called and told me she and Dad had spoken with a realtor. She said it almost accusingly. We're looking at options. Okay, there's that word again. What would you like me to say? I don't know. Do you want to move? No. Then don't. It's not that simple. I know. That time, I meant it. Mom told me the annual costs on the house had climbed. Property taxes, insurance, landscaping, repairs, utilities. They were using less than half the space. Dad hated the idea of selling because the house represented 30 years of work to him. I understood all of that. I also understood something I had not understood a year earlier. Being able to afford something did not automatically mean it remained the best use of money. Apparently that rule applied to my parents too. Mom said, "Your father thinks if we move somewhere smaller, we can reduce withdrawals quite a bit." That sounds reasonable. You don't have to sound pleased. I'm not pleased. It's hard to tell. I looked down at my desk. Mom, I grew up in that house. If you sell it, I'm going to have feelings about it. Then why won't you help us keep it? Because grief did not create obligation. Because nostalgia did not change arithmetic. Because if I answered that question emotionally, I knew exactly where I would end up. I said, because you're not losing the house. You're deciding whether keeping it costs more than you want to spend. That feels like a distinction without a difference. It isn't. She sighed. The realtor says we could sell well. I'm sure. Your father hates townhouses. I almost smiled. That sounds like Dad. Mom did too, just barely. For a few seconds, we sounded almost normal. Then she said, I still think this could have been avoided. There it was. I did not ask avoided by whom. We both knew. Instead, I said, maybe. But not without going back to the same arrangement. She did not answer. By June, the house was on the market. I did not hear it from Mom or Dad. My cousin Natalie sent me the listing with a message that said, wasn't sure if you knew. I opened it during lunch. The photographs were professionally lit and strangely impersonal. The dining room where Dad had staged the family intervention looked bigger without people in it. The kitchen where Mom had taught Lauren and me to bake appeared brighter than I remembered. My childhood bedroom had become a guest room years earlier, but I could still identify the window where I had sat doing homework. The listing described the house as elegant, spacious, ideal for entertaining. I stared at the photographs until my screen went dark. Ethan found me that evening sitting at the kitchen table with the listing open again. You okay? They put the house up. He pulled out the chair across from me. I'm sorry. They're not dying. I know. They're not being evicted. I know. They'll make money on the sale. I know. I looked at him. Then why does this feel awful? Because it was your house too once. That answer broke something open in me. Not dramatically. I did not cry for an hour, but I sat there with my eyes burning, looking at a photograph of the staircase where Lauren and I used to race each other when we were children. For all the things my parents had gotten wrong, there had been good years in that house. Christmas mornings, birthday cakes, Dad teaching me to change a tire in the driveway, Mom sitting on the edge of my bed when I had the flu, Lauren sneaking into my room after nightmares and refusing to leave. Families were cruelly inconvenient that way. The people who hurt you were still sometimes the people who had loved you. I closed the listing. Ethan asked, "Do you want to call them?" I thought about it. The old impulse arrived immediately. Call Mom. Tell her you are sorry. Ask what they need. Find a way to save the house. Restore the system. Then everyone can pretend the problem was only the toast. I shook my head. Not to fix it. That wasn't what I asked. I know. I picked up my phone anyway, then put it back down. If I call tonight, I won't know whether I'm calling because I love them or because I'm scared of being blamed. So wait until you know. That was what I did. The house sold several weeks later. There was no dramatic foreclosure notice, no sheriff at the door, no emergency move. The buyer made an offer my parents accepted. Mom later told me they did well enough on the sale that after moving costs and purchasing a smaller townhouse, they had freed up a substantial amount of equity and reduced their annual housing expenses. In other words, the decision worked. That did not mean Dad liked it. He posted one photograph in the family group chat of the empty living room and wrote, 30 years reduced to boxes. I looked at the message. I almost responded. Then Uncle Robert wrote, 30 good years don't disappear because you moved. Dad did not answer. A few days after the closing, Mom called. She sounded exhausted, but calmer than she had in months. We're in. How's the townhouse? Smaller, I assumed. She laughed weakly. The kitchen is nicer than I expected. That's good. Your father hates the garage. That also sounds right. For once, neither of us mentioned money immediately. Mom told me they had kept fewer pieces of furniture than planned. She gave the dining table to Lauren because it would not fit in the new space. She said the neighborhood was quiet and the maintenance would be easier. Then she said, "We'll be fine." I closed my eyes. It was the first time either of my parents had said that since I stopped the transfer. Not ruined, not abandoned. Fine. I know. She was quiet. We had to rethink some things. I know. Your father still thinks you forced the issue. I know that too. I'm not sure he'll ever see it differently. That hurt less than it once would have. I can't control that. No. Mom sounded surprised by her own agreement. We ended the call a few minutes later. The following week, I learned from Lauren that the future contribution Mom and Dad had once discussed toward a larger house for her had been put on hold. She did not call to fight about it. She mentioned it in a short text exchange after I asked whether the kids liked their grandparents' new place. They do. Dad says everything is being reevaluated now. The house money, too. I did not ask how much. I did not need to. That was the final proof that the old financial system had actually changed. My parents were still comfortable. They still had investments. They had retirement income. They had moved into a perfectly good townhouse. What they no longer had was enough excess cash flow to maintain every promise and preference they had built around the assumption that I would keep supplying $4,200 every month. Nobody had taken anything from them. The costs had simply returned to the people making the choices. By the middle of July, nearly 11 months had passed since my wedding. I had started going entire days without thinking about Dad's spreadsheet. The 2-page timeline stayed in my desk drawer. The recurring transfer remained canceled. Ethan and I were planning a short trip for our anniversary. For the first time, the story felt as if it might finally be ending. Then Lauren texted me, "We need to talk." I stared at the message, waiting for the rest. A second bubble appeared. Just us. No Ethan, no Mom and Dad. I read it twice before answering. When? Her response came almost immediately. Tomorrow. Lauren chose a small park near her neighborhood instead of a cafe. When I arrived the next afternoon, she was sitting at a picnic table beneath a row of oak trees with 2 coffees between us. The temperature had climbed into the humid North Carolina summer range, but the table was shaded, and for once neither of us had children, husbands, parents, or relatives close enough to interrupt. I sat across from her, took the coffee she pushed toward me, and waited. She did not waste time. You won. I looked at her. What does that mean? You know exactly what it means. She folded her arms on the table. Mom and Dad sold the house. Dad barely talks to anyone anymore because half the family thinks he used you. Mom canceled trips. They stopped the college deposits. Everything they planned for us is being reevaluated. And you're sitting there acting like none of it has anything to do with you. I put the coffee down. What do you want from me? I want you to admit this went too far. What went too far? Her laugh was short and angry. Seriously? Yes. They sold the house, Megan. I know. Mom had to pack up 30 years of her life. I know. Dad gave up the club. They're pulling from investments every month. They're watching everything they spend now. I know. And you don't feel anything? That one irritated me because she knew better. I never said that. You don't act like you care. What would caring look like to you? She answered without hesitation. Helping them. I leaned back. There it is. Oh, don't do that. Do what? Turn everything I say into evidence. I'm not. I'm asking a pretty simple question. If I care, I pay. If I don't pay, I'm heartless. Is that what you believe? Lauren looked away toward the walking path. A woman passed us with a stroller, and for a few seconds neither of us spoke. When she looked back, the anger was still there, but it had lost some of its certainty. I think at some point a boundary becomes punishment. I considered that before answering. That's fair. She looked surprised. I continued. So, tell me exactly what I did to punish them. You stopped the money. Yes, you refused every bill they sent. I refused predictable household expenses. I said from the beginning I would consider a real emergency. You made them use their retirement. Their money. You made them sell the house. No. Lauren shook her head. I leaned forward. No, this matters. Tell me what I actually did. I just did. No, you listed things that happened after I stopped paying. Tell me what action I took against them. Her face tightened. I canceled a transfer from my account, I said. I didn't access theirs. I didn't sell their investments. I didn't list the house. I didn't cancel the kids' college contributions. I didn't tell Dad to leave his club. They made those decisions because the money that used to come automatically from me stopped coming. You knew that would happen. Eventually, yes. Then how is that different? Because knowing someone will dislike the consequence of your boundary does not mean you caused every choice they make afterward. That sounds very convenient. It's also true. Lauren stared at me. I said, if I had called their broker and sold their investments, that would be me doing something to them. If I had forged documents, moved money, ruined Dad's credit, or forced the house onto the market, that would be punishment. I did none of those things. You knew Dad would rather sell than keep pulling from the portfolio. I knew that after he sent me the projection, so you let it happen. I felt my patience beginning to thin. Lauren, what was I supposed to do? Pay indefinitely so Dad never had to make a financial choice he didn't like? He's your father, and that is still not an answer. She pushed her coffee away. You're impossible. I almost smiled, but I did not. Then she said something that landed harder than the rest. You've always been like this. You keep score. I opened my mouth to deny it. Nothing came out. Because she was right. Not completely. Not in the way she meant. But enough that pretending otherwise would have made the conversation useless. Maybe I do. Lauren blinked. I looked down at my hands. I remember things. That's exactly what I mean. No. Let me finish. She leaned back. I remember every time Mom and Dad chose you because I spent years pretending it didn't bother me. I told myself I was more independent. I told myself I didn't need what you needed. I told myself being the capable one was its own reward. So yes, I remember. Lauren's expression hardened again. You make it sound like I stole something from you every time they helped me. I don't think that. It sure sounds like it. I was never angry because they paid more of your college costs. You brought that up. Because it was part of a pattern, not because I wanted your tuition. She rolled her eyes. I kept going. When I got my scholarship, Dad sat down with me and worked out what I could earn, what I could borrow, and what they could contribute. Then he told me, "You can handle the rest." I was proud of that. I honestly was. I thought it meant he respected me. Lauren said nothing. Later, when you were in school, Mom said they were covering more because they didn't want you starting adulthood buried in debt. I noticed the difference, but I explained it away. The business was doing better. You were different from me. The circumstances had changed. All of those things could be true. They were true. Yes. She looked at me as if she had scored a point. I continued. The problem wasn't that they helped you. The problem was that every time I managed without help, they treated my success as proof I had never deserved any. Lauren's face changed slightly. I could tell she had not expected that sentence. I said, "Do you remember when I moved out of that apartment after Jason and I split up?" She frowned. Barely. I was 29. The landlord had someone ready to take the place, so I had one weekend to finish moving. I asked Mom if she could come for one day. Lauren looked away. You and Mark had your anniversary trip. She was quiet. Mom said she had already promised to watch your son, and that was fine. You had plans. I wasn't angry about the trip. You sound angry now. I'm telling you what she said afterward. Lauren looked back at me. She said, "You're good at handling things alone." I paused. So I hired movers. I handled it. And that became one more example of why nobody had to show up for me. Lauren rubbed the condensation on her cup with her thumb. That isn't fair. To who? To Mom. She couldn't be in two places. I know. Then why bring it up? Because this was never about that one Saturday. It's about what everyone learned from it. I leaned forward. When you needed something, they asked how to help. When I could handle something, they asked how much more I could carry. Lauren looked down. I could see the sentence land. I continued more quietly. While I was sending them $4,200 a month, Mom once told me, "We're so lucky we never have to worry about you." A few days later I heard her tell you, "Your father and I will always make sure you and the kids are okay." I used to think those were both loving statements. They are. They can be. I shook my head. But in our family, they meant different things. "We'll make sure you're okay" meant resources move toward you. "We don't have to worry about Megan" meant resources can move away from me. Lauren sat very still. For several seconds, I thought she might cry. Instead, she said, "Do you think being the favorite was easy?" The question surprised me. I did not answer immediately. She looked almost embarrassed to have said it, then continued anyway. "You think Mom and Dad just handed me everything and told me I was perfect. Do you know how many times Mom asked when Mark and I were having another baby after our first? Do you know how many houses we looked at that Dad hated because they were too far away? Do you know how many times I've heard, 'Your sister can do whatever she wants because she doesn't have children'?" I frowned. Lauren laughed bitterly. "Yeah. That goes both ways." "What do you mean?" "You gotta leave. I live 40 minutes away. You know what I mean." I did. She continued. "You picked your job. You moved when you wanted. You dated people they didn't like and didn't care. You got married at 37 because that was when you wanted to. Nobody expected you at Sunday dinner every week because everyone already decided you were independent. That sounds like freedom." It was. Her answer came sharply. "For you." I stayed quiet. Lauren looked toward the path again. When I got married, Mom was involved in everything. When we had the kids, she was involved in everything. Dad had opinions about where we lived, what Mark should earn, whether I should work full-time, whether the kids were in the right school zone. If I skipped 2 Sundays in a row, Mom asked if something was wrong with the family. I said, "You could have said no." She laughed. "So could you." That stopped me. She looked directly at me. "You keep talking like they assigned you this role, and you had no choice. But you kept paying." There it was. My part. The part I did not enjoy looking at. "You're right." Lauren blinked again. I continued. "I did. You could have stopped after 6 months. Yes. You could have stopped after 12. Yes. But you didn't." "No." "Why?" "Because paying was easier than fighting with Dad." Lauren's expression softened slightly. I said, "That is my mistake." I kept acting like being capable made me above the family drama, when really, I was just buying my way out of confronting it. I told myself I was being practical. You were being practical and avoidant. She did not argue. I took a breath. So, yes, they gave us roles, but I helped maintain mine. Lauren looked down at the table. I continued. And maybe you helped maintain yours. Her eyes came back up. There it is. No, listen. She waited reluctantly. I don't think being the favorite means you had no pressure. I believe you when you say they expected you to stay close. I believe you when you say Mom built her identity around your kids and Dad treated your life like an extension of his plans. Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly. But we're not children anymore. She said nothing. I leaned forward. They rewarded you for becoming what they wanted. They rewarded me for needing nothing. Neither of us chose those roles when we were kids. I paused. But we're not kids anymore. Lauren's jaw tightened. I said, when Dad showed you part of that projection, you had a choice. I didn't know everything. I know. I didn't know they had 1.9 million. I believe you. I didn't know the payment was in there for 10 years. I believe you. I did not know Dad had told you 6 months. I studied her face. That one I don't know whether I believe. She looked offended. I didn't. Okay. You don't sound convinced. I'm not going to argue about something I can't prove. That quieted her. I continued. But you knew enough to ask whether I would keep paying after I got married. Lauren looked at the table. I did not let her escape into silence. You asked Dad. Not me. He said you were okay with it. And you accepted that? He's our father. So? She looked up sharply. What do you mean, so? I mean adults verify things when the answer affects them. That is easy to say now. No, it was easy to do then. Lauren shook her head. You would have thought I was prying. Maybe. You would have told me it was between you and Dad. Maybe. So what was I supposed to do? Ask anyway. She looked frustrated. I didn't want to know. The words slipped out so quietly I almost missed them. I waited. Lauren stared down at her cup. I knew Dad was trying to preserve money. I knew some of it was supposed to help with the kids and maybe a house someday. I knew you were helping them every month. She swallowed. I didn't want to know exactly how those things connected. There it was. Not a confession of plotting. Something more believable. Convenience. I asked, why? She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Because what was I supposed to do if I found out? Tell him to stop. And then what? Tell Mom and Dad not to help the kids because you might be paying some of their bills? Yes. You say that like it would have been easy. No. I shook my head. I say it like it would have been right. Lauren looked away. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, she said, I should have asked you. I did not rush to comfort her. Yes. She nodded slowly. Then she looked at me. And if I had asked and you said you were fine with it, then at least it would have been my choice. Lauren stared at me. I continued. That is the part none of you seem to understand. I am not angry because I helped. I chose to help. I'm angry because somewhere along the way my choice stopped mattering. She looked down again. I don't know how to fix this. I believed her. Start by not asking me to make Mom and Dad comfortable again so none of you have to feel guilty. Her face tightened, but she did not argue. For a while we talked about nothing. The kids. Work. Mom's new kitchen. The townhouse. It felt awkward and strangely normal at the same time. Then Lauren said, What happens to us? I looked at her. She seemed genuinely afraid of the answer. I don't know. That's it? For now. You don't want me in your life? That isn't what I said. What are you saying? I thought about it before answering. I don't want us to pretend we're close just because we're sisters. Lauren's eyes dropped. That's harsh. Maybe, I continued. But if we're going to have a relationship, I want it to be one neither Mom nor Dad designed for us. What does that even look like? I don't know. I almost smiled. For once, I think not knowing is probably healthy. Lauren shook her head, but the corner of her mouth moved slightly. It was not reconciliation. We did not hug. She did not apologize for 30 years of favoritism, because she was not responsible for 30 years of it. I did not forgive everything she had done because one honest conversation did not erase what she had chosen not to see. But when we stood to leave, I no longer looked at her and saw only the golden child. I saw my sister, flawed, defensive, complicit in things that benefited her, also shaped by the same parents who had shaped me. Understanding that did not restore trust, it simply made the truth more accurate. That evening, I told Ethan about the conversation. He listened from the kitchen while I changed out of my work clothes and reheated leftovers. So? So what? Do you feel better? I don't know. That sounds familiar. I sat down. I think I wanted her to admit she knew everything. Did she? No. Do you believe her? Yes. That surprised me as I said it. I continued. She knew enough. That's the problem. Ethan nodded. And she admitted that? She said she didn't want to know how the pieces connected. That's pretty honest. It is. I stared at my plate. I also admitted she was right about something. What? I kept paying because it was easier than dealing with my dad. Ethan smiled slightly. I'm not going to say I told you so. You just did. I communicated it spiritually. I laughed despite myself. Then my phone rang. Dad. The name appeared on the screen and pulled the humor out of the room. Ethan glanced at me. You don't have to answer. I know. That mattered. For most of my life, I had answered Dad because not answering meant creating a second problem on top of the first. That night, I answered because I chose to. Hi, Dad. He did not return the greeting. His voice was flat. We sold the house. I know. There was a pause. Then he said, You got what you wanted. I looked across the table at Ethan. He stayed quiet. I put the phone on speaker only after Dad knew Ethan was sitting there, then rested it on the table. I never asked you to sell the house. Dad gave a bitter laugh. Don't insult me by pretending this isn't because of you. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Clarity. Months earlier, that sentence would have pulled me immediately into defense. That night, I knew exactly what question I needed to ask. What do you think I wanted, Dad? He did not answer. I waited. Finally, he said, You wanted to prove a point. No. You wanted us to feel what it was like when you stopped paying. No. You wanted to punish us because I embarrassed you at your wedding. I looked down at my hands. The wedding was where I stopped ignoring the problem. That is the same thing. No, it isn't. His voice hardened. We changed our entire life because of what you did. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. I stopped one automatic transfer from my account. You knew what would happen. I knew you would have choices. We had no choice. That isn't true. Megan, you had a house worth almost $900,000. Nearly $2 million invested. Retirement income. Seller note payments. You had choices. Dad went silent. I continued, quieter now. You just didn't have the choice you wanted anymore. What choice was that? To keep all of it and use my money instead. The silence on the phone lasted long enough that I could hear the faint hum of air conditioning in my parents' new place. When Dad finally spoke, his voice was low. You really think you've done nothing wrong? I thought about the 14 months. About June. About avoiding the conversation. About keeping score. About assuming Lauren had designed more than she had. About every mistake I had already admitted to myself. No. That seemed to surprise him. I think I should have ended the arrangement when I said I would. I think I used money to avoid dealing with you. I think I let resentment build instead of saying what bothered me. Dad said nothing, but none of that means the 10-year assumption was okay. His breathing changed slightly, and none of it means I owe you another payment. He was quiet again. Then he said, You got exactly what you wanted. I looked at the phone. This time, I understood that he needed to believe that. Because if I had wanted the house sold, then he could remain the victim of my decision. If I had not wanted it, then he had to confront something much harder. He had made a plan that depended on a person he had never bothered to ask. I said, No, Dad. Then I waited. What I wanted was to stop being the part of your plan nobody thought they had to ask about. For the first time since the wedding, he had no immediate answer. Dad stayed quiet long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then he said, You keep talking about this like we had some grand plan to use you. I don't think that's how you saw it. Then what exactly do you think? I think you built a plan that made sense to you. The problem is that it only worked the way you wanted if I kept paying. You're simplifying years of financial planning. No, I'm simplifying my part in it. Dad exhaled sharply. You had 3 choices, I said. Spend less, use your own money, or keep using mine. I only removed the third. That is an ugly way to describe helping your parents. Help is something I choose to give. You treated it like income you owned. You knew what stopping would do. By the time I knew your 10-year plan existed, I had already stopped. And then you kept it stopped. Yes, you destroyed the plan. I felt strangely calm. No, Dad. You built a plan that only worked if I kept paying for everyone else. I didn't destroy it. I stopped being the assumption. He went silent. For months, I had imagined what it would feel like to finally say something he could not argue around. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I mostly felt finished. Dad eventually said, I don't know who you are anymore. A year earlier, that sentence would have frightened me. That night, I heard what was underneath it. You knew the version of me who always fixed the problem. You used to understand responsibility. I still do. I just understand which responsibilities are actually mine. He gave a bitter laugh. Apparently, your parents aren't among them. You're my father. I love you. Neither of those things means I have to make sure you never spend your own money. He hung up. I set my phone on the table. Ethan looked at me. How do you feel? Tired. That makes sense. I don't think he understood. Maybe not. For most of my life, I had treated boundaries like arguments I needed to win. If Dad disagreed long enough, I kept explaining until the explanation itself started to feel negotiable. That night, I finally understood something embarrassingly simple. Dad did not have to agree with my boundary for it to exist. Mom contacted me about a week later and asked me to meet her for lunch near my office. She looked tired when I arrived, but not defeated. That mattered. My parents had not been ruined. They had sold one expensive house, bought a smaller townhouse, and changed their spending. We ordered, made a few minutes of awkward small talk, and then Mom folded her napkin in her lap. Your father told me about your conversation. I assumed he would. He's still angry. I assumed that too. She looked down. Then she said, I think I understand something now that I didn't before. I waited. We thought because you could carry more, it was okay to give you more to carry. For once, there was no language about fairness, family duty, grandchildren, or retirement security. Just the truth. That's the first honest sentence I've heard about it. Mom looked hurt, but she nodded. We never wanted you to feel used. I know. She looked surprised. I don't think you sat around planning how to hurt me. That doesn't make what happened okay. No. She told me the townhouse was easier than expected. Insurance was lower, utilities were lower. There was less maintenance. Dad hated the smaller garage, but even he had admitted the numbers worked better. They had invested some of the equity left from the house sale. The move Dad had described as something I was forcing them into had improved their financial position. Mom almost smiled. Your father hates when I point that out. I'm sure he does. He misses the house. So do I. Her eyes lifted. You do? Of course. You never acted like it. I thought about the listing photos, the staircase Lauren and I had raced down as children, the kitchen table where Dad once told me I could handle the rest of college myself. Missing it didn't mean I should pay to keep it. Mom absorbed that without arguing. We talked a little longer before she finally asked the question I had expected. Do you think we can go back to normal? What does normal mean? Family dinners, holidays, calling without every conversation becoming tense. I want those things. She looked relieved. But not the old version. Her expression changed. What does that mean? It means you can call because you want to talk to your daughter. If something genuinely happens, you can ask me for help. And I can say yes or no. You still need to say that? Yes. She looked disappointed, but I did not soften the answer. I can be your daughter, Mom. I won't be your plan. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she nodded. All right. I did not know whether she fully understood. I also knew understanding was not something she could prove over one lunch. The real test would be what happened the next time she wanted something. It came about 2 weeks later, but not in the way I expected. Lauren texted me while I was at work. Mom asked me to call you about another insurance bill. I told her she needed to handle it herself. I stared at the message. There was no apology, no speech about how Lauren had finally realized I had been right. Just one decision. Mom had tried to send another problem toward me. Lauren had stopped it. I replied, "Okay." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. That was all. It was enough. Lauren and I were not suddenly close. One conversation in a park had not erased years of resentment or her decision to look away when not knowing benefited her. But for the first time, she had an easy opportunity to redirect family responsibility toward me and chose not to. Behavior mattered more to me than another apology. By early August, Ethan and I were approaching our first anniversary. We had not spent our first year of marriage the way I imagined. There had been more family arguments, spreadsheets, insurance bills, and uncomfortable conversations than anyone puts on a wedding registry. But Ethan had never tried to solve any of it for me. He had not called Dad. He had not told me to cut off my parents. He had not demanded I forgive them either. He asked questions and trusted me to make my own decisions. One Saturday morning, I sat at our kitchen table with coffee and opened my banking app. For most of my adult life, I had liked automatic transfers. Mortgage. Retirement. Savings. They moved money where I had decided it belonged without requiring me to reconsider the decision every month. That was also how the payments to my parents had become dangerous. Something that began as a conscious choice had eventually become invisible through repetition. $4,200 left my account every month until everyone, including me, stopped treating it like a decision. I created a new recurring transfer. Amount: $4,200. Destination: the joint investment account Ethan and I had nicknamed Our Future. The name was a little corny. I liked it anyway. I confirmed the transfer. A moment later, the notification appeared. Automatic transfer completed. $4,200. Ethan walked into the kitchen with his coffee and glanced at the screen. "You did it." "Yep." "Still feels strange?" I looked at the number. Same amount. Different destination. For 14 months, that number had meant helping. Then responsibility. Then expectation. Finally entitlement. Now it meant choice again. "No," I said. "It finally feels accurate." For a long time, I thought the worst thing my parents had done was stand at my wedding and tell a ballroom full of people that Lauren was the only daughter they were proud of. It was cruel. But the truth I discovered afterward was more complicated. My parents did believe in me. They believed I could earn. They believed I could recover. They believed I could solve problems and survive without help. Their mistake was turning that belief into permission. Because I could carry more, they kept giving me more to carry. Because I rarely complained, nobody stopped to ask whether I wanted the weight. And I had helped maintain that pattern. I used competence as armor. I paid instead of having difficult conversations. I liked being the reliable daughter enough that I ignored what the role was costing me. What changed was not that I stopped being generous. I stopped confusing generosity with automatic access. Dad and I were not close again. Mom and I were trying. Lauren and I spoke occasionally without pretending everything had been repaired. My parents were financially fine. The townhouse did not ruin them. Their investments did not disappear. Lauren's children still had college savings, just without every future contribution my parents once planned. Nobody became homeless. Nobody lost money I had taken from them. They simply had to live inside the choices their own resources could support. So did I. For most of my life, being the daughter who could handle anything sounded like praise. By 38, I finally understood the price hidden inside it. Strength does not mean everyone gets access to it. Responsibility does not mean accepting obligations other people invented for you. And generosity stops being generosity the moment your choice no longer matters. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the daughter who could handle anything. I was simply allowed to decide what was mine to handle. You can love your family without giving them unlimited access to your money, time, or strength. Help should be a choice, not an obligation others quietly assign to you. Set clear limits, ask questions, and protect your future. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more family stories here.